Let's build up the magic eye. Try putting your hands on your knees, you know where your hands are at this moment. Next turn up your right hand on its side, in a right angle with the thumb on top. You know and see it, don't you? Then lift your right arm up straight, about 30 centimeters. This, you know and see also. Then you put your right hand on your belly button. You know this too. You see this too. Next turn up your left hand, which is still on your left knee, so it is on its side. You know this, don't you? Then lift up your left arm to an appropriate height. You know it again. Then cover your right hand with your left. Again, you know and see. You know and see exactly where your two hands are. Know it directly. Don't know it by focusing on it, know it in a fresh and spontaneous way. Don't close your eyes, cast your eyes not too far away, and don't stoop over too much. Be aware of your hands. After that, raise the right hand a bit above the left one, you again know it. Whenever you move your hands, know it. Have intention and attention to be aware. Then move your right hand out to the side. This you know and see too. Really knowing, really seeing. Next, lower the right hand to the knee, on its side. Again, you know. Then you turn over your hand, so that the palm is on the knee. You know. Know it each time. Then raise your left hand to the chest. Again you know. Move the left hand out to the side. Do you know it? Lower the left hand to the knee. Know and see it again. Overturn the hand on the knee. Really know and see it. Know what's happening with your body, with your hands. Make your hands into signs, physical instruments that produce awareness. Know like this for a long time. Become aware like this for a long time, find ways to know and see all the time. Besides this, you may change the sitting posture into the walking posture to build up awareness. Walk back and forth. The walking distance should be about 11 paces. Know and see, just as with the hand movements. Whenever you take a step, know it, every time, know every step. Don't concentrate. Know each time as a separate movement. It is as if we count 1, 2, 3, but don't count. Don't inwardly repeat right, left. Don't recite any mantras. Just to be aware of the movement is enough. Know it directly. One shouldn't use reasoning or follow feelings of like or dislike. Experience the movement in a pure and spontaneous way. Don't be tense or overly determined. Let the mind be at ease, cheerful and clear. Be diligent to know. Keep finding ways to know, always. Things that can be known really exist. Wherever the hand moves, really know it. This is not knowing through thinking, it is knowing through experience. We build up awareness with intention. Be diligent to know many times, to know a whole day, many days. When you first set out, you might lose awareness sometimes. Never mind. It doesn't matter. Start again. You can know anew. Have you ever been with this knowing for a whole day? If you had time to train yourself to be aware like this for a week, would that be a good thing? So far, in our lives, have we been with awareness or without awareness? We must change the posture with awareness. Don't just change as soon as a thought comes up to change. Beware of thoughts to change the posture, don't let thought guide you. Let yourself be guided by awareness. Find ways to know and see like this more and more. We determine to watch. We know the body. Various conditions may arise that make us lose awareness. Determined to watch the body as it is moving. But there will be things that make us deluded. For example, feelings, painful feelings arise by themselves, they are conditions of the body. We don't go and look for them, they arise by themselves. See them, don't be caught up in them. Don't let there be a self in feelings, they are feelings by themselves. We have the magic eye now, we are the watcher. Now, and we are no more the one who is caught up. Whatever arises, we look. There is no I, in feelings. Watch and see. They are there, they exist by themselves like that. Whatever comes up, we are the watcher. That there is pain and aches is called Vedana, feelings, in Dhamma language. In ordinary language, we call it happiness and suffering. They are there, they exist together with Rupa, the body. This kind of suffering cannot be solved, it can only be diminished. Relate to these conditions in the right way. Don't get caught in them. They are not a self that should be grasped or held onto in any way. This is the magic eye. We see now that things are just like that. That is the way that they exist. Whether one knows or doesn't, that is how they are. It is their nature to be like that. They are conditioned like that. There is not any self. Next, one will see the mind that thinks, without having to look for it. The mind thinks by itself. It stealthily thinks by itself. We see it again. Don't get entangled in thought. Don't look at thought through thought. We possess the magic eye now. We just watch on and see things continuously. Then we return to look at the body. See the body as it is moving this way and that. As we're moving the hands with intention, as we're doing walking meditation, or when we're not moving our hands, when we're in another posture, watch it and see it. Become skilled in watching and seeing. There is just the one who is watching, one doesn't become the one who gets caught up in things. Before, we got carried away with the various conditions. We would lose ourselves with pains and aches, with the heat and the cold, with hunger, etc. But now, we know how to separate. The body is one thing and the feelings of pain, the aches, the heat, the cold, hunger, etc. are another thing. The stealthy thoughts about them is yet another thing. The kind of thoughts that we don't intend to think. We see this now. Don't believe all of those stealthy thoughts. Don't go and follow all those sneakily arising thoughts. Don't let them fool you. Mistakes will arise from it. There are two kinds of thought, one is thought that we intend to think, another is thought that stealthily arises by itself. When we determine to watch the body, thoughts about this and that will arise. Don't be fooled by them. Don't let there be a self in thought. Look at the body that is moving, here and now. Deliberately make movements. Depend on the body as a sign, as a foundation, as a refuge. Just as when we stick to a post in the middle of flowing water. When we let go, we get swept away. Then we struggle to get hold of the post again. This is just the same, when unintentional thoughts arise, don't get deluded by those thoughts but come back to watch the body, as it is moving, right here. This is the magic eye. To watch like this. Be skilled in it and familiar. First stay with the body, you shouldn't go and mess with thought. It is just like reading a book, the more we read, the more we get involved in it, because we remember and we understand. Unintentional thoughts are one thing, deliberate thoughts another. Whenever sneak thoughts come up, we are aware. It is as if we oppose the stealthy thoughts. Whenever thoughts arise, know it in time. It means that we are teaching them. We can laugh at and ridicule the thoughts. As soon as we see the sneak thoughts, they stop. Those thoughts have no intelligence, they don't have power. But when we don't keep up with them, they become mighty and they pull us along with them. Sometimes there are various manifestations that arise together with thought, and they become a mind state. For example, restlessness or sleepiness. Or an uncomfortable, irritating mood arises. The mind gets concocted in various ways. Don't surrender to these things. Watch them. We now have the magic eye. Whatever happens to the body or our mind, we watch the whole lot. It is fun to watch, fun to see. There isn't much to it. Really look, more and more, and the conclusion will be that there is only just body, feelings, mind, and mind objects that arise with the body and the mind. Pains, aches, heat, cold, hunger, etc., appear with the body, they are conditions of the body. The mind that thinks of this and that is appear with restlessness, doubt, sleepiness, etc. These things are conditions of mind. Watch them, see them. We have the magic eye now. The more we look, the more we see clearly. Watching and seeing is experience, it is a good lesson. The state of watching leads to skill. Whatever we see, we realize. Before, we never discovered these things, we never saw. But when we discover and see these things often, we see clearly, just like seeing a person, we remember his or her face, and we know his or her character, that is a good person or a bad person, we know how to associate or not associate with him or her. We see what is what. The body, feelings, the mind, and mind objects are just rupa and nama, materiality and mentality. That which sits here and walks, is rupa. Thinking this and that, is nama. These two things live together, one cannot separate them, when they get separated, there is immediate death. The magic eye really discovers and sees this, so one realizes and truly sees things as they are. Materiality is a lump, but it is affected by heat and cold. No heat, cold, hunger, etc. Feelings and thoughts that make us get up, walk and move, that no, are mentality. These two things are together, sitting here is rupa, thinking about something is nama. The magic eye truly meets with and sees this, one realizes it. Before, we didn't realize it. We were deluded for a long time. We lost ourselves in the various conditions of body and mind. We gave into those manifestations that order things around, they make us laugh, make us cry, make us love, hate, and follow greed, aversion and delusion. We think that all of it is us. We are slaves, serving the various conditionings, we surrender to those conditions that order us about. Rupa, the body, is a lump which is a slave of nama. Whatever the mind compels the body to do, it does all of it. It says to get drunk, to smoke, to take a gun and shoot oneself, to hang oneself. To swallow poison, it does all of it. Just the body itself can't do anything, it can't do anything right or wrong. In moving the hands about, what is it that orders it? What is it that orders it to get up, to walk, to sit, to laugh and to cry, what is it that commands it? Right now, we discover and see who the instigator is. In fact, it is nama, who is the boss. Rupa, the body, is the servant. The magic eye comes to discover and see this. It discovers the truth. The truth is disclosed. Rupa is part of nature by itself, but it is subject to conditions such as heat, cold, pain, sickness and so on. Feeling and thought make it get up, walk and move. Nama is that which knows things. These two things live together, as said before. The magic eye sees into this. Things are revealed. Rupa is a dhamma, natural phenomenon, in itself like that, and there are various manifestations that appear with rupa, for example pain, sickness, heat, and cold. Nama cannot experience it, but it has power. It is cruel and unfair to rupa. The body is already suffering. The body, by itself, has the nature to be subject to all sorts of circumstances such as pain, aches, heat, cold, hunger and so on. These are conditions that happen to the body. And in addition we go and have happiness and suffering on top of that. If the body doesn't feel heat and cold or hunger, it isn't a body. This is just the way it is. Before, we didn't see things like this, and we used to create suffering for ourselves with those conditions, we used to have a self in those conditions. When we come to realize this, we just let them be conditions, over there. We don't create suffering as we did before. They are not a self. Before, when we were hungry, we suffered. We suffered because of the heat and the cold. We took the affairs and conditions of the body to be suffering in the mind, and we took the affairs and conditions of the mind to be physical suffering. Both rupa and nama are not fair to each other. We assume that there is a self in all those things. As soon as we discover this, we let things be nature. There is no self in conditions. We can put things down and let go. Some things, we diminish, some things, we know, others, we let go of, we don't take them to be a self, as before. Know how to clarify and separate things. The ego really disappears. Now, we have gone beyond suffering, to some extent. Nama is feeling and thought, it is part of nature and it has different conditions that go with it, just as rupa. For example, sneak thoughts that cook up greed, hatred, and delusion, uncomfortable feelings of dissatisfaction, they color the mind, nama. They are not the mind, but they arise together with the mind. The magic eye sees clearly that those things are conditions of the mind, they are not the nature of the mind, they are just conditions only. When we don't realize it, they are a big deal. They have destroyed many people already. People who assume that there is a self in conditions, that it is I, who is angry, I am the one who is angry, and so one follows anger until people come to ruin, and a problem arises for society. The magic eye clearly sees into this matter and can really distinguish between those conditions and the mind. Originally, the mind abides in normality and is pure, but the various manifestations that arise in the mind, make the mind defiled and dirty. This is similar to clouds that obscure the moon, darkness appears and one doesn't see reality. It is like the saying of Angulimala, a bandit who lived at the time of the Buddha and became his disciple. Before, I didn't have realization, I was heedless and blind. But now, I am no longer heedless as before, I have overcome blindness just like the moon that is freed from clouds. The magic eye knows how to separate further the various conditions that happen to the body and mind. They are things that are not permanent. Greed, hatred, and delusion, for example, are not permanent. We can no longer follow them. Especially stealthy thoughts, a thought comes up and greed, hatred, and delusion arise, it turns into defilement and craving, into lust, proliferation, into becoming and birth, of self, they arise and pass away. As soon as we have the magic eye that realizes abreast of the various conditions, it catches them easily. They are no big deal. We see that it comes down to the causes of either knowing or being deluded. There is only just awareness and delusion. If we are aware, everything is normal. Awareness is the grandfather and grandmother of goodness and rightness, it is the birthplace of virtue, sila, firmness of mind, samadhi, and wisdom, panya. Moha is delusion, it is the grandfather and grandmother of everything that is unwholesome, it is the birthplace of anger, greed, delusion, of proliferation leading to suffering. When we are aware, that is, when we have the magic eye, it is just as if we are the owner of a house, we look after the house, when the house has an owner, things are normal and safe. The stealthy thoughts are cruel, they make the mind into a prostitute. The mind without anyone to look after it, without an owner, can think anything. That's how it was, before, when we didn't have the magic eye yet, we didn't see it. But now, we see it, one feels ashamed. When thoughts sneak in, we know in time. It is as if we teach them. It is a good lesson, a good experience. It is like teaching children, when a teacher teaches school children, the teacher teaches whenever the children do something wrong, the teacher solves the mistake for them and they become clever. This is a lesson that is very valuable. May you give a lot of attention to this point of right or wrong, right here is the weak point. Whenever there is something wrong, when we don't see it, the mistake will expand without limitation, and it becomes so familiar that it turns into habit and one can become shameless, doing what is wrong without any shame. Now we have the magic eye and we see the unintentional thoughts. Before, we didn't know, but now we know the stealthy thoughts in time. As soon as we see them, they stop. So we have taught them, we have taught the mind. If there is no watcher, one gets fooled by thoughts. But now we are the owner of the house, we look after the house. Before, it was easy to get deluded by thoughts, but now it is easy to know because we have experience and know in time, we realize that they are conditions and we know their characteristics, we know what their nature is. The magic eye sees clearly that the different conditions that arise with rupa and nama, are not permanent, not sure. They are just like rubbish, they are impermanent, valueless, and they are not any selves. So we don't cling to them as being any self, we throw them in the rubbish bin, that is to say, the three characteristics. The three characteristics of impermanence, valuelessness, and not self, are like a rubbish bin. Impermanence, valuelessness, and non-selfhood belong to greed, hatred and delusion, those things are rubbish. We now have and see the place to discard them. It is like having a rubbish bin in front of your home. When we have a bin, our home becomes clean. Now, we don't have rubbish, as we did before. Before, we had rubbish all over the place, there were stains of love, stains of regret, stains of loss, stains of gain, of desire, anger, delusion, we were filled with these things. But now, it is really clean. The state of watching and seeing, and on seeing not getting caught up in it, is like a garage to repair cars, things really get back to normal, without traces. Let's compare it with a second-hand car, it has been used a lot, it has bumped into things and is completely dilapidated. Now, it goes to the garage. Awareness is the garage. The state of looking and seeing, of not being caught in things, is the mechanic. This restores the body and mind back to normal. It really does. It becomes brand new. It really overcomes its previous state. We stop searching for teachers, we are fully confident because we really make a discovery, we know the direction to go in, we open our eyes. It is comparable to learning how to read, as soon as we can read a little bit and understand what is right and what is wrong, we know how to solve, how to uncover things. To solve problems can be taken to be an art, to change wrong into right, to change suffering into no suffering. To be diligent in turning bad matters into good ones, is what mind development is. On seeing a mistake, one corrects it immediately. Be enthusiastic about rectifying, altering badness into something good, what is wrong can really be changed into right and we can do it. It arises so that we can set it right. Realize and really see clearly into rupa and nama. What is their nature? What are their conditions? We don't give in, like before. We are free, we can liberate ourselves. This is really a principle of life, we can really solve problems and be liberated. At one time, I felt joy and happiness for several days, I reviewed the state that I had seen and met with. I wasn't sitting there thinking, I had discovered and seen it. Having experienced it, I kept on doing walking meditation and developed awareness. It was Dhammavijaya, circumspection, yoniso manasigara, orderly reflection, not just thinking. The mind was good. I had never seen this before. Some kinds of suffering disappeared, doubt really disappeared. My life changed, I really transcended previous states of the mind. One may call it Vipassana, insight knowledge. Talking about this, it is a profound experience of life, from the past. Let me talk about it a little bit. When I was still a layman and I was developing awareness, Luangpor Teean walked over to me and asked how I was doing. Well, I told him without feeling afraid in any way, I know Rupanama Luangpor. Luangpor protested, people who don't know Rupanama are crazy. I immediately answered, yes, before, I was really crazy, but now, I'm no longer mad. Luangpor Teean walked back and forth under the shady trees, where I used to practice. I was sitting there and I wanted to talk, but I restrained myself. I listened to Luangpor. If Luangpor Teean didn't say anything more, I would talk to him. Luangpor Teean said, "Knowing Rupanama is just that much, it is not useful." Straight away, I answered, "It is useful, Luangpor. I really got rid of a lot of suffering, a lot of stupidity has really disappeared, I'm finished with doubt, my life has really changed from before. I never knew or saw like this before, the things that I know and see are real." I wanted to say many things, but I restrained myself. This compares to having thousands of dollars in your pocket. When someone says that we don't have money, how could we believe it? The money really can be used. I waited for Luangpor to say something. If he didn't say anything, I still had many things to say. I felt confident. Luangpor Teean said, "It is useful, but only a little bit, similar to a frog that has never come across water. When it finds some water in a coconut shell, having struggled to find it, it can play and drink, but it's only just a little water in a coconut shell. If it's happiness, it's only a little happiness. If it's knowledge, it's only a little knowledge. There is still much more water in a pond. Your knowledge is just a little bit of basic knowledge. Do you really know?" I answered, "I really do." I was still a layperson at that time and I had never known or seen anything before. "If you practice more, wouldn't you know more than this?" "Yes, I will keep practicing without wavering, I won't practice any other way." Luangpor Teean taught many things. He said to do the rhythmic meditation and walking meditation faster than before. Work with the mind, watch the body with sati, awareness, watch the mind with sati, watch the mind with the mind. Watch and see suffering, watch the suffering of Rupa and Nama, Rupadhamma and Namadhamma, the disease of Rupa and Nama, the convention of Rupa and Nama. One is very confident, the path reveals itself. It is like demolishing a house, we know what to take apart, what to do first and what later, things go in one direction. It is similar to having found a path, we can walk easily, conveniently, and comfortably. We watch and we see suffering, we see the suffering of Rupa and Nama. Rupa has a lot of suffering, it is waiting for us to look at it, from breathing in and out, swallowing saliva, blinking the eyes, to standing, walking, sitting, lying down, eating and making bowel movements. They are ways of the body to relieve and diminish suffering. The body is a lump of many kinds of suffering, so many that I am not able to describe all of them. On seeing like this, one feels sad and has pity on the body, until tears well up. Before, I smoked cigarettes. How can one still burden the body by giving it cigarettes to smoke? I stopped smoking. This insight spreads effects to anger, desire and delusion, which create suffering for the body. The mind is suffering as well. We see the suffering of Rupa and Nama. The body and mind affect each other, they don't treat each other in the right way. For example, heat, cold, hunger and pains, create suffering for Nama, until one is unable to sleep at night, unable to eat, and sometimes diseases, pain, and even paralysis arise because one thinks a lot. All kinds of stomach disorders arise. Let me give an example. At one time, I went to teach the Dhamma in the north, 3 monks came with me. We traveled in an orange car. We had to sit in the back, squeezed together. It was summer and the weather was very hot. The driver stopped for a long time but didn't turn on the fan. The other monks complained that it was unendurable. One could see the suffering on their faces, they were sweating. I was sitting on one side and said inwardly, I can endure it, never mind, it's just like this. Someone who doesn't understand nature, nor the conditions of body and mind, is punished with agitation. There is suffering in the mind, there is a self in the agitation, one loses oneself in the agitation, until there is suffering. If we have realization and know how to separate Rupa and Nama, they don't have to affect each other. When we realize this, justice arises between rupa and nama. The state of seeing, the awareness that watches, is neutral, justice arises. Awareness is the source of all goodness, the market of goodness. Justice has to arise from us first, it would be difficult to find justice externally. The magic eye sees like this, and it is just as if rupa and nama are not going to oppress each other anymore. They go their separate ways, from that moment onwards until now. We realize the nature of rupa, we know what the conditions of rupa are, we realize what the nature of nama is, we know what the conditions of nama are like. We review the things that we know, this clarifies things and we can really be free. This penetrates down to the diseases of nama and rupa. The diseases of the body and the mind are innumerable, this gives rise to a strong feeling of disenchantment for suffering. One clearly sees suffering and is able to get out of suffering. The body and the mind act, they do good or bad, because of this rupanama, they abandon evil and do what is right, because of this rupanama. Real confidence arises about this. Another thing is rupadhamma and namadhamma, it is their nature, it happens by itself, nature reveals itself. Wherever there is suffering, all of it is revealed. We know all around. Now, we see the state of life, it is a principle. There are right and wrong principles. Before, we used to believe all sorts of thoughts, for example, knowing what merit is through thinking. Thinking according to what people say, thinking that one gets merit from this or that, from something external. Sometimes, making merit is just a matter of rituals and praying, something external, and the fear of doing evil is just thoughts about falling in hell, or becoming a hungry ghost, a demon. But now that we have discovered and seen things, we abandon what is evil and do what is good, that's what we use the body and mind for. Doing good has a good result, doing evil has an evil outcome. This is what religion is, religion means oneself. Not thinking, doing, or speaking evil things. If anybody still thinks, does, or speaks evil, it means they are still without religion, even though they may say, Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dhammang saranang gacchami, Sanghang saranang gacchami. I take the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, as my refuge. This is talking like a parrot, those people still don't have a religion. Merit or wholesomeness is the mind that is good, the mind that has realization, that really sees things, that is wiser than before. The magic eye sees like this, it experiences things like this, there is no need to ask anybody whether one gets merit or one is doing evil. It is similar to having eaten one's fill, do we go and ask someone whether we are full yet? We can answer that ourselves, there are no questions, only answers. Others can't give the right answer, we have to answer ourselves. When there is watching, seeing arises, when on seeing, there is no being caught up, it is liberation, it is right there. The various kinds of suffering let us know. Relate to it in the right way, some kinds have to be diminished, others have to be known. Before, we didn't have realization, we thought that all of it was self. In reality, things are, just like that. It takes a lot of trouble and misunderstanding to come to this insight. When the magic eye is there and one really sees it, one really awakens from suffering. This is called Buddha. Literally, the awakened one. Now, we have reached Buddhism, the mind knows and awakens from suffering, it is not asleep, it is not deluded, it is not heedless, it is disenchanted with the mass of suffering of the body and the mind. Greed, hatred, and delusion don't have a foundation anymore. One sees the path, sees proof, what is true and what is false. The magic eye clearly sees like this and joy arises, it is just like we have completed some job successfully, it is only natural to feel proud. The truth is revealed, nature teaches, the time has come. One penetrates convention, which is very different from these words. It is an appearance, like light destroying darkness. That's what happens, at that time. Convention cannot remain, it is seen and penetrated. One inclines to the direction of freedom from suffering, One might say, whatever goes in the direction of suffering and delusion, collides and goes to pieces, that's what it's like. Seeing convention means to see that things fall in the hands of I, all kinds of stupidity and delusion abide in the forest of convention. That's what the magic eye sees, nothing can conceal it. This really dismantles foolishness and illusion from the mind. Both body and mind are really light. Similar to carrying a heavy load many days, a long way, when someone takes the load off our shoulders, we feel so light that we can hardly stand on our feet. The mind is so light and empty, that it seems that our feet don't touch the ground when walking. Body and mind really feel light. Stupidity, foolishness, and delusion are shattered, even before we've started to use reasoning, they just drop off. It is like spotting a wild animal, as soon as we see it, it sees us, and it runs off without us even chasing it away. There is an enormous amount of convention, the world is full with it. I'm not able to describe all of it. Material things, words, fame, convention takes it all in. It is real in the ways of convention, but not real in the sense of ultimate meaning, paramatha. There is a self in all of this convention, my love, my hate, my gain, my loss, my likes, my dislikes, mine, yours, I'm better than you, you're worse than me. I and you, it's full of it, until it becomes clinging, and discord, arguments and fights arise between mine and yours. One loses oneself in convention. One thing is assumed and liked by some, but disliked by others. Sometimes we say good, sometimes we say no good. Having made a supposition, there is fear, or there is boldness. There are all sorts of conditionings, inside as well as outside, the world is full of them. It covers the minds of those who don't have realization and don't genuinely see. In the past, I was a superstitious healer. I had learned many incantations. I used to recite them all night. Still, that wasn't enough. I had to recite some chants as the occasion arose. If somebody wanted me to chase off a ghost, I had to chant the verses for chasing away ghosts. If I didn't recite, I wouldn't be fluent. Some incantations, I had to recite until I became as big as the room and my skin became tough. If on reciting, I didn't become big and my skin didn't become tough, I couldn't stop and should recite more fluently. I was really going for it. I thought I was a special person, but in fact, it was all just madness. In the past, I had tattoos all over my body, but they were red, you can't see them. If they had been black, I probably would be a statue of foolishness. All this has fallen in the well of realization, of really seeing clearly. It cannot remain, there is only incisiveness. This turns into analytical knowledge, knowing and thinking a lot. I knew in this fashion for many days. Sometimes I wouldn't be aware of movements, I would just sit there thinking. It is a kind of joy and happiness that is hard to describe. I never knew like this before. When there is realization and real liberation, one goes for the knowledge and happiness. But I had heard Luangpor Teean teach after the morning and evening chanting, which I applied to my practice. He taught that when there is knowledge, don't be the one who has knowledge. When there is happiness, don't be the one who is happy. Watch and see it, don't be the one who is caught up. This is an excellent principle. It is a formula that lets one pass anything. One could compare it to a freeway, highway, or expressway. One can pass all the time, there are no traffic jams. Whatever one meets and sees, that thing tells us what the truth is. Both rightness and mistakes tell us. One sees suffering and so one can be liberated from suffering. On seeing what is wrong, one knows what is right. Seeing one's foolishness, cleverness arises. One really experiences and sees it. The state of watching and seeing is something excellent, there is liberation in it. For example, we see a snake, we don't get bitten by the snake. We see suffering and delusion and we become clever, not stupid anymore, and there is confidence. Seeing convention, objective matter, ultimate meaning, paramatha, and changing conditions. As I described earlier, before, I would derive something good from other things, externally. But on really seeing and clearly knowing things as they are, it is like life is under our control and we use the body and the mind in the right way, so that we proceed to the complete ending of suffering. This accords with the words of the Buddha, who said one who studies and practices, will really know and see the Dhamma that should be known and seen. In proportion to one's practice, the results of practice are not limited by time. The magic eye watches from the beginning. It is supportive because one is clever. It is comparable to studying at school. A kid is clever and finishes elementary school, he or she enters high school, and because of being clever, he or she studies on at a university. Or compare it to a skilled workman. He has his good, old saw, hammer and chisel. He's been using it for ages until his work is an art. It is superb and he is well trained. That's how it is. There is cleverness from the beginning, from seeing Rupanama. On seeing, one doesn't go and be it. This truly is the way. On this path, one passes everything. It is the genuine path. One really has discovered the path. It is the realm of victory of a warrior, one may say. We are from Chayapam province, which is a region, but the realm of victory of a yogi lies in being the watcher, and in not being caught up in things easily. See it, don't be it. Whatever it may be that comes up that is connected with the body or the mind, do your duty of being the watcher, don't go and be it. This is the genuine magic eye. It makes a difference. Life is brand new, compared with before. It could be compared, as I said before, with a car that gets completely fixed up. Now, it is back to normal and can be used. It really has gone beyond its old state. The magic eye leads one to watch and know. Whatever one sees, is all purely the truth, things that really exist in this body and mind. It is not a matter of sitting there thinking, knowing and seeing through thinking, like this and like that. Rather, we develop awareness continuously. We do walking meditation. This is not called thinking. The body, the mind, and the knowing come together in the state of watching. It is wisdom knowledge that knows penetratingly by itself. This is the power of wisdom knowledge. We watch and are well aware. Whatever we see passing, whatever we are free from, we know ourselves. And we know how we liberated ourselves. The things that we have discovered are like cheerleaders, just as with sport events. Or they are like provisions, these things that we have seen. This state of watching is a fundamental principle, from the beginning, discipline, through to the end. It is a very high level, just like studying well. Having finished elementary school, one goes on to high school and then easily up to university. That's the way it is. There are also people who don't know. They say that they know many things and they can talk well, but the way they express themselves shows that they don't know. Their actions and the way they talk indicate ignorance. They just know from memory. This is not high class and they don't get anywhere. Recently, there was a project to ordain more than 10 boys as novices, during the summer, and then to let them study further at a high school. They stayed for a year and then one of the novices was sent back to the monastery. They said he couldn't read. He had finished elementary school but couldn't read. No matter how they tried to help him, it didn't work. So they sent him back. He couldn't go, even though he had somehow managed to get through elementary school. He didn't make it. Some practitioners of Dhamma may be like that. They can't make it, they are still fooled by conditions, they are seized by Mara, the personification of evil. The state of looking and seeing, and having seen, not to be caught up, lets us really go through. It really sets us free. We see suffering and we really escape from suffering. The beginning stages, from discovering Rupanama onwards, liberate ourselves continuously. Things are erased until zero remains. One cannot go back. We really have a foundation. 5 minus 5 really leaves 0. Having seen the body, feelings, the mind, and the mind objects from the beginning, we have discarded them. At that point, we're already in a different world. Then, we see convention, objective matter, ultimate meaning, and changing conditions, and the various conditions drop off. On seeing impermanence, valuelessness, and that there is no self, we throw things out so that everything is all gone and it is clean, there is no disorder anymore. Cleanliness and dirtiness teach us. Heaviness and lightness teach us. How can we let things become dirty again? It is like things continuously are brought down to zero. When one does something for a long time, one naturally becomes skilled in it. When one practices awareness until one reaches the state of watching and knowing the body and mind, one becomes skilled in the ways of the body and the mind. It is easy to be undeluded, easy to know because one has victoriously crossed over a mountain that obstructed one, namely the Nivaranadhamma, the 5 hindrances. There is readiness to see thought, one is tuned into stealthy thoughts. One is faced with them, suddenly. They come through a door, and the state of watching is already at that door. One hits them on the spot. The sneak thoughts are at the end of their tether, they are destroyed, that's what they deserve. Before, we saw them too, but we saw them glossed over, now, we see them openly and in time. They cannot be concealed again. It is as if the state of looking is the judge, and the sneaky thoughts are the accused who confess because there is evidence. They surrender and can't escape. The truth appears. There is no way to deceive or cover things up anymore, they have lost completely. Stealthy thoughts are the origin of suffering. Conditions have deceived us for a long time, we only just found out now. This may be called a victory in life, it was a profound experience in my past. Let me talk about it a bit. At that time, I was sitting in my hut, close to Luangpor Teean's hut. This hut was made from the wood of a coffin, the paper was still stuck to the planks. It was made into a small hut. This really is the profound past of my life. At the Budayana forest, a monastery in Loi province, almost 30 years ago, people were practicing very diligently. After the meal, we would take our bowls mindfully back to our huts, we would look after ourselves. When sitting in the hut, we would leave the door half open, that's what Luangpor Teean told us to do. Someone who closed the door of his hut, was assumed to be taking a nap in the daytime. When Luangpor would come by, he didn't dare to knock on the door, being afraid that the person inside would be asleep. These are meaningful memories of my life. The magic eye discovers and sees the stealthy thoughts, and the sneaky thoughts are the loser, they fall apart. It is a bit like bowling, I saw on television how the ball scatters the pins about. It is similar to that, the whole region falls over, they affect each other. The I, that used to exist in sneak thoughts disperses like a little wave. It is similar to seeing convention, suffering, foolishness and doubt drop off. Anger, desire, and delusion are pacified until hardly anything remains of them. That's what they deserve. Anusaya, latent tendencies, habits, stealthy thoughts, and proliferation shrink back, it is the destruction of everything that is not right, there really is no lingering to all that. Thoughts that arise stealthily are very dirty. Before, we could think anything, and we did, thinking without any sense of shame, caught up in stealthy thoughts like a madman. But now, we see that unintentional thoughts are very dirty, very gross. If we compare it to an offender, this is the number 1 culprit, as for actions of body and speech, they are culprit number 2. I used to think that thought is something refined, before. Whoever doesn't see it can think anything. Thinking completely shamelessly, thick-skinned. Now, we see the sneaky thoughts as the root cause, that is to say, delusion, moha. It is the grandfather and grandmother of everything that is bad. Because of thought there is concoction, anger, desire and delusion, defilements arise, craving, lust, ill will etc. I have said many times that there are 2 kinds of thought, namely, intentional thought, this is vijja, knowing, it is wisdom. Stealthy thoughts, the second kind, are avijja, not knowing, delusion. When seeing like this, it is as if the mind has escaped from fog and clouds, the mind is pure. When thinking, one thinks specifically and orderly about a particular matter, one thinks with a pure mind, there are no moods interfering. Life is crystal clear, each thing is exact. One may as well say that the mind has been tamed, it doesn't rebel and it is not wild, as before. There is a change in the mind, at this point. The mind is on a higher level than before. At this stage, I could say to myself that I am a human being. Before, I used to be a man who would have ups and downs. I would be affected by everything, the mind would get carried away with all kinds of conditions. But now, it can no longer be like that. This is what it means to be a human being. Being over-serious and tense, the mind that goes up and down, these conditions are worthy of being fed up with. I feel ashamed of those states of mind. Putting it another way, at that time, I was an angel because I had a sense of shame towards myself. I didn't dare to do, say, or think bad things. Even though somebody else might not see it, I would see it myself. I am ashamed of evil, of unwholesome things. Angels came to help me, not the angels in the sky, outside of me. This kind of angel came to support me, it helped me not to have troubles and suffering. I was a god, because I had only loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. The mind was full with love and kindness, without limitation. The mind was stable, not shaken, like a solid rock that doesn't tremble in the wind. Now I have a home. I am the watcher. It is a victory that is safe. It is the peak of being a human being. I closed the doors to bad destinations. I can guarantee that I'm not going to be a hungry ghost, a thick-headed demon, a hell being or an animal. Now, I have a refuge, life is stable. I am definitely a human being, the mind is exalted, like someone who is on a high place, he or she is able to see people who are lower. We've trained the mind and it really is finished with its wicked tricks. The mind is exalted. Being born as a human being is a great gain. It is a great gain because we can train ourselves to be aware, until there is no more sneak thinking to be found. This arises from training oneself. It is not as if we are a human being as soon as we are born. When one takes ordination as a monk, a senior monk asks in the ceremony, "Are you a human being?" The candidate answers, "Yes, sir, I am a human being." Before you can be a monk, you have to be a human being. One has to train oneself well, until the mind changes, then one has a foundation and one has the right to ordain. One doesn't act, speak, or think in evil ways. I dwelled in the state of normality for many days, before I knew that I had sila, virtue. I knew it after I had it. I saw it because it was there. It is not knowing through thought. I made contact with virtue, samadhi, firmness of mind, and panya, wisdom. Both the body and the mind are in a state of normality. Normality of body, speech, and mind, is what virtue, firmness of mind and wisdom is. The body is normal. The mind doesn't have highs and lows. Wisdom is to understand conditions thoroughly, from knowing Rupanama onwards. One overcomes proliferation, really being liberated from it, it doesn't come back again. It is like we have a good job and enough money, there is no hardship as before, no more struggle and endurance. Virtue, firmness of mind and wisdom, together with the angels and gods, all come to aid. Someone who is angry, who has desire, is deluded or is suffering, is a poor person. It is like that. Even though I was doing walking meditation and building up awareness, it all came together in just being the watcher and the knower. It is the same seeing. This is the eye that sees the Dhamma. At this stage, one has escaped from danger, on one level. The hindrances, delusion, and restlessness don't come to bother one, one is going towards having virtue, firmness of mind and wisdom, fully. The state of watching and seeing, and on seeing not being caught up, is the path. This is what it means to live the spiritual life. Purity arises, virtue is pure. The six senses, i.e., the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, become composed by themselves. One doesn't have to sit with the eyes closed in order to get away from something. While doing walking meditation or standing, one can have a mind that is firmly established, samadhi. One advances to the state where there is only just watching. One is no longer a servant of conditions. There is the unconditioned, visankhara. This is something different, it's another world. Sometimes, I would review the stages of practice that I had passed, the principles that I had discovered, how I was liberated in stages. It's like going on a long journey, one passes this town and that village, leaving them behind, which indicates the direction of the goal. Let me give a comparison. At one time, I traveled to the south to give Dhamma teachings. The distance is about 1,500 kilometers. A driver took me there. He said it would take about 12 to 13 hours. I thought it would take longer because an air-conditioned bus, leaving from Bangkok, takes 15 to 16 hours. From Chayapam province to Bangkok is nearly 400 kilometers. It wasn't very long and we were past Bangkok, having the midday meal. The driver drove quite fast. This really indicates the direction our destiny is in. We reached the place in the south as the driver had predicted. This is just the same, practicing Dhamma is like that. When one practices in the right way, it is like rolling a boulder down the hill or like sitting in the right bus, it will take us to where we want to go. It is really safe, one really experiences merit and wholesome things, one really shuts the door to bad destinations, one really continuously overcomes dangers. Entering into the state of looking is life summed up, leaving just a handful. There is nothing messy, as before. Life is simple, without burdens. This state of watching is the diamond of the Dhamma, it penetrates down to the Sanyojana, fetters, it is the point where the door of reality is opened, nothing can obstruct it. Whoever trains him or herself in this state of watching, will pass through everything. It really is the way, it is the living of the spiritual life. One is able to destroy the ego. Sakayatati, Vijakitcha, and Silabpatha Paramasa. The first three of the 10 fetters, the tree that Asothapana, one who has reached the first of the 4 levels of enlightenment abandons, cannot remain because of the state of watching and seeing, and on seeing, not to go and be. The destruction of the ego is another level of coming down to zero. The mind certainly undergoes a shift, compared with before. One respects oneself. One really is a noble one. One is more excellent than before. I used to hear Luangpor Teean teach that there are 3 levels of goodness, namely, good, better, and best, that's how he taught. One truly can be a noble one. This state is the meaning of a noble one. In the evening chanting, there is a passage that says that, the Sangha is born from the good Dhamma and practices well. The Sangha is not born through ordination chanting, that is just convention, it is true in the ways of convention. The community of monks that is born from the good Dhamma is beyond convention. It is universal, both men and women can be noble, it has nothing to do with nationality, language, or age. To be born from the good Dhamma means one trains oneself, to be aware until one reaches the state of watching, this is the door of the good Dhamma. When the state of watching is well cultivated, one is far from enemies, far from defilements. When compared to traveling, one goes further and further away. One leaves anger, desire, delusion, and suffering behind one. This is called a noble individual because one is far apart from those things. One could say that being or losing oneself in those things, has ended. To stir up the mind to be angry, have desire, be deluded or suffer again, is not possible. It is like being violated. Suffering is wrong, it is non-suffering that is right. One can neither suffer nor does one take it on. Not even a tiny bit. This is the noble individual, the one who is removed from enemies. Suffering is an enemy to life. One is far away, one is not stained, there is supreme sila, supreme samadhi, and supreme panya. There is complete normality, which is the standard of life, one may say. It is the freedom of life. It is nature. Nature is what remains. Proliferation is all gone, it has turned into purity. One steps towards victory, the time has come. Things have become easy, whatever we watch and see, finishes. There is nothing stuck in our minds, zero. Things drop off, we don't want them, there is only emptiness. Taking the mind as measure, when one has desires, it shrinks up all the more, it is all the more deficient, but when it is empty, the more full it is, the more perfect, the more sufficient. It is like the saying of Ruttapala, who was an arahant, fully enlightened one. He said, "The world is by nature unsatisfying, there is no fulfillment, and people are slaves of desires and defilements. Nobody can ward off the world, nobody can be above the world. The world is form, sound, smell, taste, touch and mental objects. The eyes, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind are never content. Who can find fulfillment and satisfaction from form, sound, smell and taste? And whoever hopes to be in control of happiness and praise, will be disappointed. Don't claim to be the owner of things, because when things are separated from us, you will suffer, feel bad and be broken-hearted. We have the opportunity to become skilled in studying our life, it is the art of extinguishing suffering. It is like walking on a smooth path, not bumpy. Now we have come to a point, where it could be said that there is friendship in our lives, it is the standard for our lives, one cannot return to that state of bumpiness anymore. It is genuine experience. This is not just sitting there thinking about it. When reaching this point, things come together as one. It is the state of watching, it is wisdom knowledge. As I said before, this is being far away from enemies, one really has overcome enemies. The ego has really been nullified. Irritation, conceit, holding to views, sensual desire, desire for forms, formless desire and clinging, have all come to an end, the cankers of sensuality, being, and ignorance have been destroyed. It is the knowledge of explosion, finished, the whole lot of it. Whatever is not Dhamma has all disappeared. Life has tuned into the spiritual life. Really pure and liberated. The body doesn't do anything bad, the mind doesn't think anything evil, and speech doesn't say anything that's no good. They have been pure for a long time. All defiled actions have dried up without anything remaining. It is like a dried out fruit that, all black and shriveled up, still hanging in the tree, it doesn't have any effect on the tree, it doesn't have any seeds and it cannot grow up anymore, even when planted. I bring up some comparisons because the truth is hard to express. Purity and perfection are powers. They make things easy, just like rolling a boulder downhill. There is supreme virtue, supreme firmness of mind and supreme wisdom, the aggregates of sila, samadhi, and jnana. There is security and one enters the realm of the noble ones. It is the superb path, the exquisite path. It is not knowledge, it is not reasoning, it is beyond reasoning. It is as if things are dispelled, there is reflection on the Dhamma, it is dispelled and joy and happiness remain, that also is dispelled and the knowledge of equanimity is what is left, that is dispelled and there is not any self anymore. It is the remainderless extinction of perception, one cannot find any perception, not even a tiny speck of it. Talking about emptiness, this is emptiness, talking about fullness, this is fullness. It is full of nothing, and it is void of all kinds of having and being. It is comparable to a flood, the flowing water sweeps the rubbish away from the streams and canals until it is all gone, one attains to the knowledge and fruits of practice. It is nature, it is the law of nature. It is like green bananas ripening and becoming yellow, the astringent taste turns into a sweet taste. This is nature, this is the law of nature, it has nothing to do with reasoning. One doesn't know exactly how the lock is opened, it is the Dhamma, it really is the law of nature and it is beyond speculation. It is as if the body, feelings, perception, volition, and consciousness have a job, they have their duties and they are diligent at doing their duties. But it is a job that is bound to fail, just like little children playing with sand, they are diligent to build sand castles but it won't be long and they are destroyed. But now they work together, they stop together, they come to a halt at the same time and everything returns to nature. The body, feelings, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness go back to nature, there is a separation, they go their own individual ways. At first, one still tries to connect them but it is no use, it is like trying to connect two different things with each other, it may look like they are connected but they are not, they are separated, they have returned to nature and they can't become one, in the same way that a rope that has been cut can't be put together. There are just movements left. It is the end of self. There isn't anything further to do. I reviewed the stages of practice, I was quite skilled in them. It is the art of life, more so than any form of art in this world. It is the state that is beyond birth, aging, sickness and death, it is the final destiny of life, all forms of life must reach this point. It has been worthwhile that my parents have raised me, that was in order for me to come to this ultimate goal, right here. It has been worthwhile, all right? This is not sitting there, figuring things out. To be in that state, is not the same as knowing it. When life has come to this point, everything falls in place, the only thing left is just movements, of body and mind. Insight, the fruits of practice and nibbana, coolness, really exist. The Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Noble Sangha really exist. Non-birth, non-aging, non-sickness, and non-death, really exist. The magic eye induces you to watch, see, and know many things, up to the last goal of life. I'm just summing it up, I don't give a lot of details, just the states that can be found in our bodies and minds. I'm talking about us, people, from the beginning of building up awareness with the body and the mind, both the body and the mind are objects for awareness. Then, we come to the state of watching and one is the one who sees, not the one who is caught up. One continuously discovers things about the body and the mind. One has realizations and sees clearly. There is nothing that is concealed or hidden. On seeing what is wrong, one overcomes it, on seeing suffering, one overcomes suffering. I would like to make this known, so that you may all try out studying and practicing it, developing the knowing a lot. When you see that there is a mistake, solve it, when you see that it is right, develop it. I'm talking here, as a Buddhist. We practice in partnership, everybody is responsible for building monasteries, making merit, and being generous. Some people donate money to build a monk's hut or erect a meditation hall, this makes it convenient to practice. Others establish a fund to provide for food. In this monastery, Wat Pasukatho, there is such a fund, quite a large amount, so we don't have to worry about food. Then, there is the Dhamma, the teachings, when you put them into practice, you will be able to truly know and see those things, that should be known and seen. And the results will come, regardless of time and place, one will know and see the Dhamma in accordance with one's practice. I have the intention to be your friend and I am sure that I won't lead you along the wrong path. There are many places, lit institutes, all over the place, where one is able to study. We take it, practicing Dhamma, to be a profession. The details and solutions, you will experience and see when you put forth effort to be aware. Really be aware of the body and the mind, as I have been introducing since the beginning. Be diligent in knowing, don't go into the kind of peacefulness where you don't know anything, where the mind is under the power of delusion. Sitting in peace is laziness of the mind. To pay attention and to have the intention to be aware, is diligence of the mind. Therefore, being diligent can turn into the great foundation of awareness, Mahasatipatthana. When you have a lot of awareness, delusion diminishes or exhausts. Awareness gives rise to virtue, firmness of mind and wisdom. When there is awareness, the six senses automatically become composed. Awareness creates merit and one can let go of evil and unwholesome things. Awareness makes one understand what religion and Buddhism really are. One gets answers from being aware and one will experience all things, wholesome things as well as unwholesome things. There are no questions, there are only answers. One has to answer oneself, others can't give the right answer. One will get the answer to the questions, what does non-birth, non-aging, non-sickness, and non-death mean, and what is the great foundation of awareness? A staff of teachers gave Luangpor Teean the title, Principal Teacher of Developing Awareness, in this age. There is happiness in sitting with the eyes closed and the mind peaceful, as long as one abides in peace. But as soon as one comes out of that peaceful state of mind, there is still anger, desire, and delusion. The senses are not yet steadfast, one still evades things. In developing awareness according to the standard of the foundations of awareness, one must be diligent to know, to build up the quality of knowing a lot. Don't enter into peacefulness to the extent that one doesn't know anything. Know in time the proliferation in the mind, until you can control the arising of mental formations. Developing awareness is like looking after oneself. One sees the movements of the body and one sees the stealthy thoughts in the mind. Always be aware in time. As soon as one becomes aware that a thought has sneaked in, the thought will stop. It is just as if we teach the mind. When the mind gets taught more and more often, the mind becomes tame and it is easy to not have sneaky thoughts, it is easy to know. It all comes together in the knower, the watcher. Teaching oneself is valuable at the time that one is caught up in stealthy thoughts, and one discovers that one is being deluded. This is a very good lesson, a very good experience. It is only awareness that is able to see delusion. It is definitely not the kind of peace that doesn't know anything, peace under the influence of moha. Rather, it is awareness that makes one gain liberation. As soon as there is awareness, there is liberation there also. For example, one sees a snake and the snake doesn't get a chance to bite us. When awareness has been developed until one is skilled in it, one arrives at the state of seeing. This is the eye that sees Dhamma, that sees suffering, and therefore, one goes beyond suffering. According to the principles of the Four Noble Truths, one sees suffering and gets out of suffering, is liberated from suffering. Seeing the origin of suffering, seeing the cessation of suffering and the path leading to that cessation, works in the same way. In practicing Dhamma, no matter what technique it may be, it must be a way to develop awareness, to be aware. If there is no awareness, it is not called practicing Dhamma. To develop awareness is a universal principle, no matter what religion you may hold to, what nationality you may have, whether you're male or female, young or old, if you breath in and out, turn up the hand or raise the arm, and you're aware of it, we're one, we're the same. We know in the same way. This is where religions meet, at this point. Awareness has nothing to do with rituals. Awareness is awareness. It belongs to the one who is aware. Don't view it only as a form. Awareness is not the breath or the rhythmic meditation, these are only just ways to build up awareness. When we plant rice, we must wait as long as half a year to get results. But in developing, or planting awareness, we don't have to wait for even a split second, we know immediately. Breathing in, we know straight away, breathing out, we know straight away, raising the arm, we know straight away, it is to be known individually, we know it ourselves, we see it ourselves. We don't have to ask anybody, we can answer this ourselves. Developing awareness is to work on the perfections, 10 qualities that the Buddha accumulated before he was enlightened. It is the birthplace of all goodness. Awareness is compared, by the Buddha, with the footprint of an elephant, all wholesome things come together in awareness. Awareness is the real life, it is the present. If the present is good, the future is good. If the present is good, the past is good. Tomorrow exists but no one sees tomorrow, one can only see the present. The meaning of past lives does not refer to before we were born physically. Upapagathappunyatha, an individual who has performed good actions, previously. Previously is the present. One doesn't have to dive into mother's womb and try to correct bad actions, done in previous lifetimes. The teachings of the Buddha are Hpajadthung, to be known by each person for him or herself, so one should be able to know and see, at this time. One does a good action now, one abandons what is wrong now. Whoever is aware abandons what is wrong, does what is good and purifies the mind. These three things are the teachings of the Buddha, summed up in the Ovada Padimokkha, a short but important exhortation by the Buddha. All of this can be found in us. Awareness is the body, speech, and the mind. Morality, the mind well established, and wisdom, arise at the body, speech, and the mind. Awareness is the source of merit and wholesome things. Merit and wholesome things arise at our very body, speech, and mind. Awareness is where insight, the fruits of practice, and nibbana are born. These things are to be found in the body, speech, and the mind. Awareness can close the doors to the bad destinations. The bad destinations arise from the body, speech, and the mind. To be aware is to be respectful to Buddhism. When one is aware, one doesn't say, think, or do bad things. There is no suffering and one doesn't oppress others or oneself. Whoever is aware has respect for one's parents and one's teachers. In having respect for and loving one's parents, children, wife, husband, brothers, and sisters, one is not a bad person. One does not speak, act, or think bad things, and one doesn't have suffering. One doesn't create it for oneself, nor for others. To love and have respect doesn't mean to worry and think until one can't sleep at night. When one loves, one should be able to sleep. Don't think a lot and suffer until you're unable to sleep. Sicknesses will arise from it. You have a hard time yourself, and others, who have to look after you, are also burdened. To develop awareness is to make progress in all aspects of life. Your health will be good, the society will be good, the environment will be good, even the economy will be good, because of awareness. It changes what is bad into good and what is wrong into right. It changes suffering into non-suffering. And it even changes greed, hatred, and delusion into non-greed, non-hatred, and non-delusion. These are the results of awareness. When there is a lot of awareness, delusion will be reduced to the smallest amount and danger will come to an end. Life will enter the deathless state. It is eternal life, beyond birth, aging, sickness, and death. And this can be found in this very life. When everybody is aware, all people in the world will live together in peace and coolness in the twinkling of an eye, and everybody without exception will be happy. The excellent path for human beings. We can learn the course of humanity by using the body and mind as our scriptures, that is, to try and be aware while using the body and the mind. To study and watch, to know and see, by using the method of developing awareness as taught by Luangpor Teean Jittasubho, namely the rhythmic meditation of moving the arms, and the walking meditation. To intentionally make movements, in order to first see the body, which is coarse, and later on, to see the mind or to see thought, concocting things up. Let's compare developing awareness with a child learning how to write. When the teacher writes an A, or a B, on the blackboard, the child remembers it and can write it too. Studying and knowing about the body and the mind is similar. First, we have to train in awareness to see the body and mind clearly, then we will be able to use awareness well. We practice the rhythmic and walking meditation, in order to clearly know with awareness the movements of the body. When we see the movements of the body clearly, we will see the mind clearly also. We don't have to go and look for the mind, but we depend on watching the movements of the body, which will automatically take us to the movements of the mind. Keep watching the body all the time, try and watch with intention, acknowledge the feeling that arises at the time the body is moving, for example while doing the rhythmic and walking meditation. In one day, one can know many, many times. While being aware of the movements of the body, sometimes there may be many things that delude one, for example thoughts that arise unintentionally. Usually this happens when we're doing our best to develop awareness. Take it to be a lesson, an experience that comes to teach us something, to come back again to the body and re-establish awareness with the movements of the body. Delusion teaches us to not be deluded. For people who are peaceful by nature, it is easy to be aware and to have sati sampajanya. The practice of meditation places much importance on awareness, and always feeling oneself, realizing one's actions, because sati sampajanya is able to change what is bad into good, and what is wrong into right. One who is aware tends to do what is good, because awareness is the source of sila, samadhi, and panya. So, we find a method to study and understand our minds by watching both the body and the mind. When we are skilled at watching the body and mind with awareness, and we clearly understand the body and the mind, we will know what merit and evil is, and what religion means. We will come into contact with virtue, firmness of mind and wisdom. We don't just think about it, we experience it. This is a law of nature. Therefore, make effort to always watch and see the body, knowing and seeing it through the mind contacting it. It is just like a teacher writing something on the blackboard for the students to see. First we have to make an effort to watch. Determine to watch until you won't forget. Before, the A and the B were on the blackboard, but now, we contact the A and the B in our minds because we've paid attention. Watching the body and mind with sati compares with a computer that records information. When we put information in our minds by regularly training in watching and seeing, we evolve. This makes us see the body and mind as it really is. Understanding and knowledge about our bodies and minds will arise until the course of humanity is finished. This is called realization. Realization compares to stepping out of the darkness. We see our own minds and we don't get caught up in various manifestations. We see physical and mental things for what they are. We see the nature of both the body and the mind, and we see what kind of physical and mental manifestations there are, for example, heat, cold, like and dislike. If we don't see clearly, we yield to nama and rupa and their conditions, and we are under the power of proliferating thoughts. But when we are fully aware, we escape from that power. It is like solving a mathematical problem. One is able to do it when there is nothing hindering the mind. So, to come to understand the body and the mind is like finishing the basic course completely. Before, we used to be caught up with the conditions of mind. For example, being the one who is hot, when feeling hot, being the one who is cold, when feeling cold, being the one who is hungry, when feeling hungry, or being the one who endures pain, when feeling pain. We were the one who is caught up with all those manifestations. This is called to yield to conditions, letting them be the boss. When awareness arises, those things cannot be the boss any longer because we see that they are just conditions of the body and mind. Anger, for example, is a condition. It is not permanent and it doesn't have any essence. To see like this, is therefore comparable to the arising of a magic eye, that receives and knows the expressions of the body and the mind. The magic eye means, to be fully aware and to see that Rupa Dhamma, and Nama Dhamma, are subject to the three characteristics, of impermanence, valuelessness, and non-selfhood. Then, we're able to let go of body and mind. This is similar to not having a whole lot of rubbish scattered all over the place, as we did before. Whatever happens to the body and the mind, we throw all those conditions of body and mind into the three characteristics of anajjung, dukkhaung, and anatta. Before, we had lots of garbage which was a hassle. There were stains of suffering, stains of anger, of desire, of delusion, of love, of hatred, of heat, and cold. But now, we don't have all that rubbish anymore. It is merit to see impermanence or to see the three characteristics. Merit here, refers to seeing the conditions of body and mind, and to be able to use the body and mind in one's life, in the right way. Evil is to not know the conditions of body and mind. It is compared to darkness. Such a person is considered to be uncultivated. Both the body and mind are undeveloped because one allows proliferation to be in charge. This makes one hold on to anger, lust, and delusion. Sometimes one lets anger be there for several days. When we clearly see and realize the body and the mind like this, we are no longer uncultivated, we are high-class people. Religions deal exclusively with people, they are teachings about the body and the mind. We all have a body and a mind. Both merit and evil can be found within us, in our actions. When we practice up to this point, rupa and nama, or the body and the mind, treat each other in the right way. Before, the body and the mind were oppressing each other all the time. For example, when hot or cold feelings would arise in the body, the mind would suffer, or when anger would arise in the mind, the body would be uncomfortable. They would oppress each other all the time. But now, we see the body and the mind relating to each other in the right way, because awareness is there to watch them. When we know this much, we have a foundation in practice and we make continuous progress. It is similar to passing elementary school with good marks, and thus having the opportunity to study in high school. Having a foundation means that we're fluent in watching proliferation arising. This makes us see the concoction that's going on. When the state of seeing arises, we don't get carried away with the proliferation that arises. This seeing is an important principle because it is able to smelt and digest all of the defilements. This compares to studying well and being able to read and understand the meaning. From the state of continuously watching, we come to see convention and suffering. The state of watching gives rise to fluency. It is like having a good tool, it makes us proceed on the road of life all the time, and we don't get to a blind alley. Not seeing suffering, or the suffering connected with the body and the mind makes us grasp onto it, all of which is a burden. When we see clearly, some types of suffering drop off immediately because we see the world as being full of convention. Some of it are material things, others are mental. Even language is convention, the world is full of it. It is called the conventional norm. In the past, I learned many superstitious chants. I used to sit and recite them at night. I had verses for making holy water, for going into the forest, for dressing, for eating, for leaving the house and for catching cows and buffaloes, for all of it. It was over the top. The happiness I got from it was little, if any. It is like a trader in kapok or fiber, he or she gets little money. In terms of merit, it is little merit and it is not lasting. But now, I'm no longer a trader in kapok or fiber, now I'm a trader in diamonds and I get loads of money. Seeing convention makes one able to completely give up on those verses. For example, the chants about the 108 virtuous qualities of the Buddha, belief in various ceremonies, invulnerability verses, which one has to recite until one feels that one becomes big and one's skin becomes tough. These things I have completely discarded. Instead, lightness of body and mind arose. I realized what convention is. Whatever somebody does, I understand it. Whoever does right or wrong, I know. When I fell into the well of knowledge, I saw all things in the world as being full of objective matter, ultimate meaning, and changing conditions. I saw that all things have causes and are conditioned. For example, I saw that sometimes an object can be supposed as good, as bad, as likable, or as not likable. Ordinary people assume words like love, hate, like, dislike, beautiful, ugly, they take this person to be good and that person to be not good. This is all quite ordinary, but it makes one not free in seeing. This is called, knowing convention, the norm, and ultimate meaning. On knowing these things the mind is set free because the state of seeing clearly has arisen. Falling in the well of knowledge means to know in all postures and all movements, one knows while walking, while sitting, while seeing, while hearing, etc. This is called the arising of wisdom knowledge. It leads us out of the various problems. Seeing clearly supports our continuous progress. One comes to know what virtue is, what firmness of mind is, what wisdom is. One really makes contact with merit. It is not like before when we just had ideas about it. I can assure you that the mind that really experiences merit, doesn't fall in hell, is not a hungry ghost and is not a thick-headed demon because one knows what is right and wrong. To experience merit is therefore useful. To come into contact with evil teaches one to let go of it. It is similar to having stepped on a thorn. When we see thorns, we don't step on them as before. So, really making contact with merit is for the extinguishing of suffering, for peace, and for liberation. When we stay with virtue, we experience virtue. There is normality in both the body and the mind. The body is in its normal state and the mind is in order. The mind doesn't go up and down, it doesn't run wild. The state of normality of the body and mind is virtue, firmness of mind, and wisdom, thorough understanding, arising, which keeps purifying the mind and sets it free. Knowing the causes and conditions makes one not stupid, not deluded, and one is able to contact sila, samadhi, panya. This is called the training in virtue. It is the virtue that arises from the path of practice. The state of watching and then seeing, and having seen, not being caught up, is the genuine path to overcome suffering. When one watches continuously, the mind will be purified. It is the living of the spiritual life. This is the way to come in touch with virtue. Always stay with this state. It is the training in sila. It is the virtue that melts and eats up the corruptions of mind, and one is able to let go of evil, do what is good and purify the mind. It can be taken that the training in virtue is really advantageous. It is not the kind of virtue that one recites in a ceremony. Right now, in carrying on with one's life, one can find virtue. One is then someone with real virtue. Sila makes the body, speech, and mind normal. At this stage, we have really become a human being, and really closed the door to hell and the evil destinations, because we know the path, we know virtue, firmness of mind and wisdom through experience. It is not knowing through memory, thinking or figuring things out. Rather, we meet and see, we experience sila, samadhi and panya, we experience the noble path and the spiritual life, brahmacharya, which is purity. Before, it was as if there was more than one person inside. One person was the watcher, one person was the thinker, and the one who made movements was still another person. But now, in the state of watching, all three come together as one. The state of watching arises, when developing awareness with the movements of the rhythmic and walking meditation. It makes it easy to know and see the movements of the body and the mind, the concocting thoughts. In the past, proliferation would control us completely, and that would give rise to sleepiness, restlessness, doubts, etc. But with awareness, we are able to conquer proliferation, and those mind states no longer exist anymore. This compares to traveling on a highway. When we pass this town and that village, where do we get to and what is it like beyond there? Well, nobody has to tell us, we know, see, and experience that for ourselves, naturally. Next, one comes to know, see, and experience what angels are. Angels are people who are ashamed of doing anything that is evil. They don't dare to think evil thoughts, speak evil words, or do evil things. Before, I used to understand that angels were up in the clouds. I thought that there was a heaven up there. It's all right to believe that, but those angels cannot help us. The kind of angels that arise within us refer to having a sense of shame of wrongdoing. One doesn't dare to think, speak, or act in evil ways. One doesn't even dare to think. This is what angels are. Angels are within us, so we don't have to bow to them, we don't have to pray to them. I had never thought like this or known like this, and so I would like people to study and come to know it, to practice with it. One day, as I was doing walking meditation, I thought to myself, this person probably doesn't know, that person probably doesn't know. I thought about my parents, my relatives. I wanted them to do walking meditation. I wanted them to sit down and build up awareness. I thought with loving kindness and compassion, I wanted to help them. Walking on the excellent path makes us go beyond being a man or a woman, being a hungry ghost, a demon, or a devil. One becomes a human being, one who has a superior mind. Someone with virtue, who lives one's life according to the noble path. One abandons what is evil and does what is wholesome. One's mind is like that of the gods. One knows merit and evil, and one genuinely understands Buddhism. This is what the excellent path leads us to see and understand. Religion exists in people's very hearts if those people refrain from evil, perform only good actions and their virtue is pure. But if one still thinks in evil ways, it can be taken that one hasn't reached Buddhism, even when one recites the words Buddhang, Dhammang, Sanghang, Saranang Gacchami, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. Religions teach people not to have suffering, religions teach people to do good. If one is still suffering, one is not reckoned as one who has reached the religion. One's life might become blemished, it might go downhill. When we arrive at religion, we relinquish evil and do only what is right. This compares to someone who does certain things, until he or she makes a living with it and is stable in it. He or she is able to depend on it, in order to live his or her life. This is how we experience things. The state of watching and then seeing, and when seeing, not being caught up, is the most concise action. It is like the Dhamma is really in our fist, we don't have to do a lot. Before, I was in a mess, I clung to ceremonies, clung to others and believed in rituals. I was even afraid of my own thoughts, because with thoughts come doubt, fear, love, and hate. But when full awareness arose, I wasn't like that anymore because I determined to only just watch. It was as if my life came down to just doing that much. Studying and practicing until one reaches the state of watching and seeing, and not getting caught up, is the point of completeness, the point where all things come together. It is the diamond of the Dhamma, because one is able to smelt the fetters, 10 deep-rooted and subconscious tendencies in the mind. Seeing Rupa and Nama, seeing suffering, seeing convention and seeing the mind proliferating, gradually diminishes the ego. The mind gradually turns into one of a human being, which means that there is morality as a refuge. The way to hell and the bad destinations is closed off, because one refrains from evil, only does what is good and really makes the mind pure. The door of the truth is opened, the mind is free because one can destroy the ego. One abandons the first 3 fetters, namely, personality view, doubt, and attachment to precepts and practices. At this point, the mind changes and comes to see and understand. Before, it was as if the ego was hiding by the door. But now, the watcher keeps a watch over the door. As soon as the ego appears, it is discovered and the ego falls apart because it can't endure verification. It could be compared to a tree that has fruit, as soon as one shakes it a bit, some fruits will fall down. And in the same way, greed, hatred, and delusion, and those 3 fetters that are deeply instinctive and are conditions, that arise from the body and the mind, drop off and disappear. The mind that changes into a noble one, is the superior mind that is able to destroy the ego. When one experiences this, the ego drops off and is finished with. It is as if wholesomeness and unwholesomeness, or dirtiness and cleanliness are separated. Being a noble one is to have this kind of excellent mind. This is how the mind changes. It is not a matter of changing clothes, or changing one's words, it is not a matter of ordaining, using this or that ceremony, that is just convention, that is being a monk through convention. But when one is a noble individual, one is far removed from suffering and defilement. Suffering and defilement are the enemies of life. The ego with its attachment is an enemy of life, because wherever there is ego, it is like having stains, stains of losing, of winning, of happiness, of suffering, of getting, of losing, etc. When one can relinquish the ego, it is like having a dilapidated car that gets fixed up, and restored to its normal condition. The body and the mind are the same. The path of Dhamma takes us to this point. It is the excellent path, it is number 1, it is the superb path of life. When reaching this point, one experiences what it is to be a noble one. The mind that makes this shift, is a diamond of Dhamma, it is the doorway to truth. As we chant in the evenings, the Sangha that is born from the good Dhamma, is endowed with such virtuous qualities as practicing well. Being born from the good Dhamma, is right here, The noble Sankhya is born right here. It is born from developing awareness, until one reaches the very state of watching and seeing, and on seeing not being caught up. This state of watching is the path, it is the spiritual life. If one compares it with the road, it is a smooth highway. Lust, irritation, conceit, and attachment to views and opinions, that one used to have and was caught up in, dry up. Comparable to fruits that are, all shriveled up, still in the tree. Purity arises, it is high sila, high samadhi and high panyat. It is the aggregate of virtue, firmness of mind and wisdom, and they get better all the time. The body doesn't do anything bad, speech doesn't say anything bad, and the mind doesn't think anything bad. One is separated from evil and one gets further and further removed from enemies. Suppose, before, we were driving very slowly along a bumpy road full of holes. As soon as we get to the smooth highway, we can drive at ease and we don't get stuck, we can keep going. One becomes skilled at being in the state of watching, seeing because of watching, and on seeing not being drawn in, it becomes more and more an art. Whatever one does, if one is an artist, one can do it excellently. For example, a painter who uses just a single pen or a single brush. He or she is able to fluently produce an image of a mountain. It is a magical thing that improves continuously. I try to bring up comparisons through using convention, because the truth is sometimes hard to put into words. When the state arises where there is supreme virtue, firmness of mind and wisdom, the supreme spiritual life and supreme purity, one abandons the various things that used to intervene, both in the body and the mind, it changes altogether. Whatever passes, whatever one experiences, one really knows and sees it for oneself. It is like when we finish something, we know that it is finished. One reflects on the Dhamma that one knows and sees and liberated one, how did it arise? There is more and more a sense of separation and reflection, happiness and joy arise. It is comparable to being pulled along by a current, going to the sea, one doesn't have to make any effort. Or it is like a strong man, he is able to lift up weights immediately. It is the same with the paths and fruits of practice, from the first stage of enlightenment upwards. It is smooth and refined. This can destroy the ego, and the defilements starve. At this stage, no perception arises and there is no, deluded, identification, it feels like it's hard to think and get carried away. To go back and think in ways that make one be something or other, makes one's hair stand on end. Anyway, neither the mind nor the body would be caught up in it. The corruptions of mind shrink back. One can no longer think like that. Old perceptions have disappeared. It is as if one is born anew. Having arrived at this point, it seems as if the ego is gone. There is nobody left. The self has been burned up by knowledge. It is like shriveling up. It is the ending of all perception. The mind is free. It is as if a state arises that is parted, and disconnected, it looks vague and indistinct. The five aggregates that one used to cling to, that were the germ, now don't get anything to eat and so they starved and a separation takes place. Before, form, feeling, perception, volition and consciousness would work together, but they would each have their own function. Now, they dried up, everything shriveled up, as if they had become loose and come apart. Sometimes I would still be deluded enough to connect them, but they wouldn't hold together, even when connected, there were only just processes. All speech and all thoughts were purely just processes only. It was the end of proliferation in life, the finish of craving and attachment. When reaching this state, one knows that the paths, the fruits of practice and nibbana, really do exist. One knows that non-birth, non-aging, non-sickness, and non-death, really do exist. Luangpor Teean knew this matter, right at this point. The Buddha, the Dhamma, the Noble Sankhya, the paths, the fruits, and nibbana, really exist. We are really able to be liberated in this lifetime. Teaching people to know this matter, can be taken to be the greatest thing in the life of human beings. It is better to teach people to reach this final goal than to teach generosity, because this leads to the end of suffering, the end of being. This is the most excellent thing. If this state arises, then help to support this teaching. If there is nobody to talk about it, there won't be anybody to listen to it, and the Dhamma will completely disappear. I consider talking about the truth to be my profession. When one takes the truth as one's profession, one has to talk. If nobody shows people how to practice, it will be the end of the truth. If you are interested to study and practice, I will arrange food and a convenient enough place, a hut or a meditation hall for you to use, so you can try out training yourself. Before, I used to live out in the country, far from civilization. When many people would come to practice, there would be a problem. Sometimes there would be a deficiency of things, which would make it inconvenient for the practitioners. But at present, I have a place, and if you're interested, I will look after things. I will be your friend as far as I can. We will share happiness and suffering. Don't suffer by yourself. I'm sure that I won't lead you along the wrong path, because I have discovered the path to some extent. When seeing suffering, one discovers suffering. When seeing something that is wrong, one overcomes what is wrong, and when one discovers the path, one can reach the final destination. No matter whether you are ordained as a monk or not, I have a place prepared for you. If you have suffering, don't do anything else. I really have found the way out. It is the number one way. Reflect on this, but you shouldn't just use reasoning. You shouldn't create conflicts or just have blind faith. Don't be averse to anything. These words are just words. Once they have been received, they might disappear, but if you're interested, try out to practice. If you read these words and immediately confidence arises, it is not right. First, practice. If, having practiced, results arise, then be confident. If, having practiced, there are no results, then find another method. Meditation is something that has to be tried out through practice. When one experiences it by oneself, one's actions will sort things out, or destine the course of one's life, by themselves. It is not a matter of figuring things out or memorizing. One must put things into practice and one must experience things for oneself. Being aware is to develop the four foundations of awareness. Anybody who turns up the hand or makes other movements, and is aware of it, is practicing in the right way, because awareness is the sprout of enlightenment, that is, it makes wisdom spring up. One must start up from this point of making use of movements. It really is the birthplace of the four foundations of awareness. This really is the excellent path. It is called, Agamagko Visuddhya, the excellent path for purification. Buddha arises from building up a lot of awareness. One has to do that oneself and practice oneself. The method of developing awareness, as Luangpor Teean teaches, is really up to date. The more diligent one is in building up awareness, the more one knows, sees, and understands one's life. Awareness is with us all, as long as we have a body and a mind. To have awareness is the treasure of a human being. It is the same for all of us, without exception. No matter what country you live in, what nationality you may have, or what language you may speak. Be aware. Just raising the arm, feeling it, is already good enough. Guidance to train oneself. We must use our lives to train ourselves diligently. We must take ourselves to the ultimate and final goal. This is called an excellent life. If we don't train ourselves, it is easy to get involved in things. For example, if there is suffering, we suffer until we die. So we have to train diligently in order to overcome doubt, worry, sadness, anger, desire, delusion, etc. This is called following a good example. The characteristics of our thoughts are the same, they don't differ much. Whatever one is familiar with, one thinks about that, following our disposition and character. The environment has an influence on our lives. For example, someone is born in a good family but the environment is no good, and it gives that person information that is no good, the result is that that person receives bad information. A bad past leads life to delusion and bad actions. This is a law of nature. There are certain states of mind that we shouldn't surrender to, such as doubt and worry, because we still have a way out. Try to reflect on the examples that good people set. The Buddha, for instance, he is the founder of a religion, the enlightened one, the one who clearly understands the world. We should study his example, so that we will understand why the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, religion, merit, heaven, and Nibbana, really do exist. If we still have doubt about this, it means that we still have suffering. We must understand these matters clearly and go beyond doubt. If one still tries to figure these things out, still doubts and worries, one still suffers. These things should be understood clearly and doubt should be done with, because there are teachers that can teach us how to know and see these things. In the past, I heard that Luangpor Teean Jidasubho was a teacher who taught how to clearly understand merit and evil, heaven and hell, and the paths and fruits of practice. Since I had doubts about practice, I went to study with him. When I first set out to practice, I still held on to views and opinions, and didn't accept certain things that Luangpor taught. I would use reasoning to contradict his teachings, and consequently like and dislike would arise. These things are hindrances that prevent knowledge and understanding from arising in practice. Therefore, when a teacher gives advice, one should first study and try it out through practice. Luangpor Teean taught me to develop awareness, which I had never come across or seen before. He taught me to have sati, and to be diligent in building up lots of awareness. Awareness, as I had learned it as a child, and at the time that I was studying the Dhamma, meant to recollect. I had trained in awareness with other methods, for example the kind of meditation where one sits with eyes closed and recites a mantra, in order to make the mind peaceful. I used to do it that way. Everybody seemed to be teaching like that, to sit with the back so straight that one starts to sweat and one gets backaches. Some people are very serious and force themselves. That's the way that I used to do it. I trained in this until the mind became peaceful, and happiness arose which was pleasant. When I trained with Luangpor Teean, he taught me to be aware and not to go for peacefulness. He taught not to control thoughts but to just know indifferently, which was certainly a strange way of teaching. Before I could catch the awareness in practicing, there were definitely many things that snared me. Sometimes, I fell back to my old practices, and as soon as I would raise my arms to do the rhythmic meditation, I would go back to being peaceful and stay with happiness, because that was more convenient than diligently knowing. An old man of over 70 practiced together with us. He advised me not to just sit there being peaceful, because that is not useful at all, but rather, to be diligent in building up the quality of knowing, to be aware while making movements. He kept guiding and looking after me. In the end I asked myself, what's the point of being fooled by thoughts? That's just an old habit. Let's train and be diligent in building up the quality of knowing. One has to control oneself by determining that, if I get lost in proliferating thoughts, I will try to be aware by making use of objects to know, such as movements of the hands. As soon as one turns up the hand, one really feels it, one really sees it by oneself. Whenever the hands move, one is aware. When one can catch the feeling of moving more and more often, proliferation gradually diminishes. In this way, I got a foundation and really saw results. Previously, I used to think about the future and the past, but now concoction would stop on seeing thought, and I would stay with the present, stay with the movements. One really knows the movement of turning up the hand, one doesn't have to wait for even a second. One knows again and again, one really knows many times. When there is truly a lot of knowing, one becomes diligent in building up the quality of knowing continuously, just as when one keeps diligently working and gets lots of work done. So, if one really catches the quality of knowing, and one is really diligent in building it up, one gets plenty of knowing. It is useful to have lots of knowing, because whenever one gets lost in thoughts, going all the way into the past or the future, the quality of knowing pulls one back, so that one doesn't easily flow with thought. Whenever one is swept away with proliferating thoughts, one immediately comes back, one is really able to come back. We're able to train and give rise to the quality of knowing in the various postures, for example, while doing walking meditation, or making movements with the arms. Whatever you take hold of, know it. The breathing, know it. Just have only this quality of knowing, and you will have a foundation. Before, I used to stay with the breathing. I would recite a mantra and seek peace, I would force myself to be peaceful. It is useful to practice like that because one gets peaceful and understands what peace is. But when I reached the state of knowing, I understood that the state of being aware and awake is something different from peace altogether. Awareness gives rise to knowing, one doesn't stay with peace. When we blink our eyes, we can know, when we swallow saliva, we can know, moving a finger, we can know, breathing, we can know. Whenever we touch something, we can know. These are examples. Therefore, creating this quality of knowing is a kind of art. It can be created in all postures and movements. All it takes is that one puts forth effort to know what's happening within one's body. It is comparable to having a set of tools that one uses to build up lots and lots of knowing. If one does it in the right way, diligence arises. There is an old saying that says that it is as easy as rolling a boulder downhill. But if one doesn't do it in the right way, it is as hard as rolling a boulder uphill. When one does it right, one gets a foundation and one becomes diligent to practice and build up awareness, without anybody having to tell one tells oneself and creates plenty of knowing. One becomes diligent to know in using one's daily life, always trying to find ways to be aware. Even though at times people or friends cause us to get lost, we make effort to avoid that. We are careful to take the chance, to know for ourselves the things that arouse knowing, nobody has to tell us. It's like working, when we do it right we are diligent and fluent, but if we don't do it right it's like banging our head against a brick wall. We know and see for ourselves what delusion is like and what knowing is like. We know and see what the advantages and disadvantages of knowing and delusion are. And so, we prevent and deal with things automatically. One has the answers oneself and doesn't have to ask anybody. If there is a lot of knowing and one knows for long periods of time, one will see the conditions of the body, because the quality of knowing is the one who watches the movements. However, this doesn't mean that one will see this immediately because sometimes, as the body is moving, instead of just seeing the body, there are things that make us get lost, for example, feelings that arise due to unintentional thoughts, or various moods, either coming from the body or the mind. These things incite us to get lost but we don't. These things are there but now we have seen that they are just feelings. People who have trained in meditation before, will just meet with coarse feelings, and the refined feelings that exist in the body and the thinking mind, they won't see. If we build up the quality of knowing until it is the boss, it will be able to distinguish delusion from knowing, even though delusion, proliferation, was in charge before. We will be able to pass through subtle feelings without having to get involved. It compares with traveling and passing through various villages, we leave this and that town behind us, and pass through without getting involved. But someone who easily loses awareness, is incessantly interested in the thoughts that come up, reasoning in every way, and loses a lot of time by thinking. Like, dislike, and all the rest of it arise. This is someone who is not determined to walk the path. The Buddha said that, someone who is heedful is awake when others are asleep, such a one leaves foolish people far behind, just as a well-trained horse leaves a horse without strength behind. Not getting involved with proliferating thoughts that arise is like this, one moment of knowing is to be removed one moment from not knowing, from delusion. One gets further and further removed and one becomes skilled in knowing, it is easy to know. Before, it was easy to get lost, but when one trains oneself it becomes easy to know. The feelings and the various thoughts that make the body move are, nama dhamma. When the quality of knowing sees this, one understands the body. Before, the quality of knowing wasn't there yet, and one had not yet discovered that it is thought that orders the body around. One assumed that there was a self that was moving. But when one understands rupa and nama, one understands that rupa is something solid, composed of many things. One knows heat, cold, hunger, and pain, because of rupa. Nama is the mind, feelings and thoughts. It receives and knows all kinds of things. There are innumerable conditions that arise together with the mind. Anger, worry, desire, and delusion are some examples of coarse ones. They make the mind run wild and it takes them to be self. Actually, they are not self, but one doesn't know that they are conditions of mind, and so one acts following them, until those various conditions give rise to a sense of self, of me, being like that. But when the knowing watches and sees them, one understands that they are only just conditionings of the mind, and one can let go. To sum up, the body that is alive is a lump that consists of two things, namely, rupa and nama. At this point one knows how to separate rupa from nama. And so one clearly realizes the relationship between rupa and nama. This may be called the arising of insight knowledge. It is a really clear realization. Reality doesn't deceive. This point can be taken as a universal standard. Teachers cannot deceive disciples, and disciples cannot deceive teachers about it. Whoever comes to this stage, no matter what nationality one has, or language one speaks, one will see like this. Having seen it, there is no more problem, no more doubt. One abandons and puts things down, right there. When we have our eyes open we can see all sorts of things. For example, we see that this is a rock, that is a tree, and that is a snake creeping over there. It's good to see. If we don't see it's dangerous, but when we see, we're safe. But seeing with the eyes can still be deceptive because it is not a realization. Realizations don't deceive, rather, they set one free. There is security in realizations. To see is to make an end of one's burden. When the quality of knowing sees rupa as a lump of suffering, it creates the feeling of having pity on the body, because the body doesn't know anything, it just does its duty. It gives us signals of what is dangerous, for example, heat and cold, so that we can do something about it. We didn't see this before, and so we thought that I am hot and I am cold. But now we see rupa and so we know how to solve the problem. The body is suffering already as it is just a lump of suffering. One has to breathe, has to swallow saliva, has to blink the eyes, has to stand, has to lie down, has to eat, has to go to the toilet, etc. When we give it more work to do, such as smoking cigarettes, it is a burden for rupa, we make it suffer even more. The mind is the same. When we're angry, we give the body suffering. This is oppression that works from both sides, from the side of the body as well as from the side of the mind. This kind of relationship between the body and the mind is not appropriate at all. When there is the knowing, or the state of watching, peace arises. And rupa and nama relate to each other in the right way. Before, I used to think that I didn't have suffering, because I didn't do anything bad. That was because I didn't know what suffering was. Whoever thinks like this can be taken to be crazy, crazy with self. So, in the past, I didn't understand myself. Likewise, having or being anything, as well believing one's own thinking, is dangerous because one understands that to think like that is good, and one doesn't see that there is any problem to be solved. One assumes that things are like this or like that. One knows through thought, one is through thought, one sees through thought, and one gets and attains through thought, when one is not in contact with the present. When we're faced with facts that contradict what we thought, we don't have a way out of suffering or out of our ideas, constructed in the past. If one knows the suffering of rupa and nama, one will understand that they are really lumps of suffering. Pain and sickness are conditions of the body. This is called the disease of the body. Anger, for example, is a condition of the mind. This is called the disease of the mind. When we don't know this, we cling to all kinds of things and create suffering in the mind, such as love, hatred, anger, desire, and delusion. When we wake up from the disease of body and mind, we see the suffering of rupa and nama. It is as if this quality of knowing opens the door, and we can see through. The knowing is like an eye. Before, we had our eyes closed and didn't see, there was only just getting caught up with all sorts of conditions. But now, the quality of seeing arises because there is knowing. This is called training oneself. This is the way that I have trained myself. It is really the guideline for people. It makes one see the convention of body and mind, for instance fame, possessions, money, children, husband, wife, land, etc. The world is full of physical and mental objects that are convention, inside as well as outside. One sees this penetratingly. It is as if the power of wisdom knowledge sees that these things are conventions of rupa and nama, diseases of rupa and nama, rupa dhamma and nama dhamma. Before, we didn't see these states, and so we got caught up in all kinds of conditions. Knowing convention makes one feel light. In the past, I used to go for all sorts of things, superstition, verses, chants, and I believed in rituals. On performing some of them fear would arise, others would make me bold, doubtful, happy, or sad. I ended up with nothing because it's all nothing but convention. A thing is sometimes assumed to be likable and sometimes not likable, it can change, and we go for it all. When I came to see rupa nama and convention, I felt light. It is not like ordinary seeing, but when one sees, suffering disappears. The gross kind of suffering, such as suffering that comes from foolishness, delusion, and stupidity, really disappears. It compares to having finished one's studies, one is able to read and write, doesn't get stuck, has enough knowledge and is able to stand on one's own feet. What I'm talking about is a universal standard, it is a fixed formula, just like mathematical formulas, 2 multiplied by 5 is equal to 10, not 11. When all this knowledge arises, one knows what other people are saying, one knows the objects that one looks at, there is just knowing and joy. It is insight, because one now has the eye that sees the Dhamma. It is fun to watch, whatever one looks at, one hits it on the spot. Both material and mental phenomena, inside as well as outside. Whatever happens to the body and the mind, one knows immediately, and one leaves it behind without hesitation. Before, when something would come in contact with the mind would ripple. Now the mind doesn't ripple, rather, the object that comes into contact with the mind is set free. When I was still a layman, I went to practice Dhamma at the Budayana forest, in Loi province. I had to use a wooden platform from a nearby monastery, and I bought a plastic sheet to make a roof. Tattered monks' robes were used as walls, because in July there is plenty of rain. As I was practicing, somebody told me that I should understand Rupa Nama, because he saw me practicing for a long time without understanding it. Some people said that they knew, just practicing for a week, and they knew Rupa Nama. But I practiced for 2 whole weeks and still didn't know it. I thought to myself, I really have to see it in my mind, I'm not going to just remember others' words or figure it out with my own thinking. That's how Luangpor Teean taught, he taught to practice and see it for oneself. Next, I thought, Luangpor Teean used to say that he had made large offerings to the monastery, including building a ceremonial hall, all by himself. But I am a poor man, I didn't do all that. I probably don't have a chance to realize the Dhamma. These thoughts made me feel inferior and doubtful. Then I thought, but I've done some good things, maybe not as much as him, but I've made merit, built a monk's hut and I am not a bad person, I don't have any stains of wickedness. I've always been virtuous because my parents are Buddhists and taught me to do what is good, and that's what I've been doing all the time. Especially when I studied superstition, I had to keep precepts, I couldn't gamble. My character was like this. Reflecting like this, made me a bit proud of my past because I was not an evil person, but why didn't I know the Dhamma? I asked Luangpor Teean, are there any practitioners who don't get any knowledge after having practiced? Luangpor Teean said, that has never happened. It seems that I am the first one, because after 2 weeks I still don't know anything, I remarked. Luangpor Teean walked up to me and grabbed my hand. I said, you have made merit and made offerings, but I have never done as much of that as you, I guess I don't have the merit to know. He answered, never mind, don't worry. Are you practicing sincerely? I said, I really am, Luangpor. Luangpor Teean said, practice here for 1 month. How much money do you get for 1 month's work? I answered, I get 1,000 baht a month. In those days I was a hired hand, making doors and windows for houses. This was building work, skilled labor, and I would get at least 1,000 baht a month. Next he said, if you practice for 1 month and you don't get any knowledge, I will give you 1,000 baht, I really promise you that. But you have to practice sincerely. From then on, I was energized in practicing. Practicing in those days, I would sometimes get lost in criticizing certain monks, thinking that they didn't have the same virtue as me, because I saw them playing and joking. Sometimes, they told me to go and look for bamboo shoots or to climb a tree and collect fruits. I asked myself, is this called practicing Dhamma? It made me think about leaving. But having reprimanded them in my mind, I no longer looked at others. Instead, I only watched and listened to Luangpor Teean. I didn't pay attention to others and create a mess and a burden for myself. So, I made a firm resolution to build up awareness, to build up sati. After practicing Dhamma for less than 20 days, I had an experience and lots of knowledge arose. When practicing in the right way, it becomes as easy as rolling a boulder downhill. But when doing it wrong, it is like rolling it uphill. Doing it in the wrong way is just a burden, there are many things that one doesn't like, and then one goes and thinks about them. One is thinking, reasoning, liking and disliking like a madman, and this makes one not attain the Dhamma. Building up the quality of knowing, or awareness, is not something one can think up, rather, one has to practice in order to know. In the past I had been an occult healer, and had verses and chants. When I built up the quality of knowing, that stuff just dropped off. I didn't do anything about it, I wasn't the slightest bit reluctant to give it up. There was no more foolishness, delusion, attachment to rituals, and playing around with witchcraft and sorcery in my mind, from that moment onwards. I used to think that I was a magician, able to heal the sick. An invulnerability chant has to be recited until one feels that one's body swells up, and becomes so big that it squeezes against the walls, or until one perceives a razor blade as a blade of grass. Then one has reached the end of the recitation. To do this well, one has to recite often. Magic chants depend on recitation, they depend on training in psychic powers. Sometimes I would chase off ghosts, I would cut off their heads with a sword, making a loud sound. I've done that for many people. When I built up the quality of knowing, I stopped doing all that stuff. One day as I was practicing, Luangpor Teean came walking over and asked how I was doing. I answered him without being afraid of anything, I know Rupa Nama now. Luangpor Teean said, if you get understanding from practicing in this way, then do more of it. Try to keep up with thought, watching it. This refers to unintentional or sneaky thoughts. If no thoughts occur, then watch the movements of the body. Whenever thoughts arise, be in time to watch. Luangpor taught me to work with the mind, to watch both the body and the mind with awareness, to watch and see suffering, suffering of Rupa and of Nama, to watch and see physical and mental phenomena, and convention of Rupa and Nama. When proliferation arises, one shouldn't give it priority. One should do one's duty of watching the movements of the body and the thoughts in the mind. One shouldn't give attention to thoughts that come up by themselves. Build up awareness that is in time with the thoughts arising. When one knows the thoughts in time, one doesn't incline to go with the arisen thoughts. So, it is our duty to build up awareness. When one builds up more and more awareness, in the end it suddenly meets up with thought. It is as if one opens the door and collides with thought. At the moment a thought is about to come up, we are lying in wait at the door. As soon as the thought arises, whack, we know it in time. It's like a surprise, and the thought fails to establish itself. This makes one see how wild concoction is, sneak thoughts, and it makes one see the origin of suffering. This is not like ordinary knowledge, it appears in an electrifying flash. I definitely have seen thought clearly. Before, we got carried away with thoughts, sankhara, which are the cause of suffering. We wandered here and there with thought, and we got lost in it. One is not free because of thought. To give an example, a thought arises and one becomes afraid, one starts to think about something and one proliferates defilement and craving. We didn't see this clearly before. When I came to practice with Luangpor Teean, I clearly saw how bad mental formations are. It's like a dog chasing a deer, we were able to follow and keep up with the things that deceived. It is comparable to somebody who plays tricks. They have fun in deceiving people, but as soon as we see what they're doing, and we keep up with their tricks, we then know that it is nothing at all. They really can't deceive anyone who realizes what is going on. There are two kinds of thinking, namely, first, unintentional thinking. This is illusion, it makes one get lost, on thinking one is led along the wrong path. Second, intentional thinking, never mind about that, one deliberately thinks about something well, one makes use of thought and having finished thinking, that's the end of it. Intentional thinking is crystal clear, it makes one understand merit, demerit, and the nether realms, one experiences these things clearly. I can 100% guarantee that, by understanding like this, one closes the door to the lower realms. One can be said to be a human being. In the past I was still just a person, because I didn't see convention, I didn't see rupanama. But when I could keep up with thought, I stopped being merely a person. I had more happiness than before, I no longer played about like before, it was as if I had reached the shore, to some extent. If one compares it to a trader, I was a trader in diamonds and got heaps of money. Previously, I was like a trader in kapok or fiber crops. What a mess, what a hassle. And I got only a little money, a little happiness and a little merit. I thought I would get merit from others or from doing this or that, just mind stuff. There is a shift that takes place in the mind on seeing thought. To go and proliferate as before makes one's hair stand on end. To see thought helps one to behave differently than before. I really saw it crystal clear. To suddenly meet up with thought makes an end to coarse behavior. Everything that is unjust disappears. It is like bowling, the pins all tumble over, one after the other. Suffering is comparable to fruits up in a tree. When we shake the tree just a little, the fruits fall down, but not all of them. Foolishness, crude forms of suffering and anger, desire and delusion are affected, but not a lot, they are just shaken up a bit. Being a human being means to be someone with virtue. When there is virtue, there is normality, there is peace. Samadhi refers to the mind that is in order. When there is order, there is no mess and the mind becomes tame. Wisdom means to know all around, to know how to solve things within oneself, to know how to liberate oneself and not to sink down, being caught up with all sorts of conditions, but to be free. This is how I knew, and later I understood other things as well, such as angels. To be an angel is to have a moral mind, not daring to act or think in bad ways. I understood Buddhism, and I understood the three characteristics of all conditioned phenomena, namely, that they are impermanent, without intrinsic value and not self. Seeing rupanama, seeing the conditions of body and mind, and seeing all things as they really are, is like having a magic eye. One sees that all things are impermanent, it is like seeing the place to dispose of the conditions of body and mind, one used to cling to. The mind becomes clean because there is no rubbish lying about in it, there are no smuts of love, regret, anger, suffering, obtaining, losing, winning or failing. This state of mind is called, seeing the three characteristics. Merit is to have an upright mind. Religion exists within us. Evil has to be abandoned at the body, speech, and the mind. If one still thinks, talks and does bad things, to take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha by reciting a formula, is useless. I didn't know this before, I thought that thinking was something refined, that whatever one thinks, nobody sees it. But in seeing it I know that unintentional thoughts are gross, they are dirty, and because of that I don't dare to think. When one doesn't dare think, how is one going to talk and act? So whatever is bad, I don't dare do it, not even to think it. This is called being an angel because one is established in the morality of angels. The kind of angels that one can really meet and see are the angels that arise in the mind, that is, one is afraid of evil, one doesn't dare to perform what is bad. As for the conventional angels, they refer to kings and important people, who have happiness and ease, without much suffering. On reviewing the previous stages, from seeing Rupa Nama onwards, it appears as if Rupa and Nama encourage us, they don't leave us. The three characteristics don't leave us. They are like a stack of provisions, or reserve players at a sports event. In other words, they are a big army. Seeing the stages all the way through gives us encouragement. One knows, sees, and understands the three characteristics, and it is as if they keep following one continuously. To be an arahant, refers to the mind that is utterly pure. When one enters the stream, that leads to Nibbana, the angels come to praise one. It is only human beings that are able to reach the path, fruits of practice and Nibbana. Therefore, human beings are considered to be the uppermost beings. It says in the scriptures that being born as a human being is a great gain. In the state of being human, the mind really rises higher. It is not just a matter of having 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head on top of the shoulders. That is still not a sure thing. It might be a spook, a giant or a hungry ghost. But practicing up to this stage, one really is a human being. When one walks to the plane at the airport, there are certain conveniences. On walking to the door just opens up for us, no need to open it yourself. Going up, there is a conveyor that takes one's suitcases, one doesn't need to carry them oneself. A Brahma god doesn't have 4 faces, as some will have it, rather, this refers to the qualities of loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. When I understood like this, it made me think of those who don't know yet. I wanted people to know and see. I thought of this and that person. I thought of my father has died. I thought of my mother. All right. I'm going to teach my mother. I'm going to teach my brothers and sisters. What I've been saying may not be all of it, but if one really studies and practices, one will know many things and doubt will come to an end. It will make one see right and wrong, this is called realization. One will shift from being a person to being a human being with morality. Training and practicing until there is realization, will give one sufficient understanding about angels, about Brahma gods, about virtue, firmness of mind, wisdom, religion, merit, demerit, and Buddhism. One won't have any doubts, even about such matters as visions, ghosts or whatever it may be. The mind will be steadfast, not attached to any ceremonies. Everything comes to a conclusion within oneself, and so one stops searching for teachers. The teaching, by the Buddha, that says to associate with the wise and not to associate with fools, refers to oneself, one's own body and mind, which are wise or foolish. To love one's parents means, not to lead oneself to do bad things and get into trouble. Respecting teachers isn't just a matter of bowing to them, rather, one should revere their goodness. Don't try to find angels outside of yourself, they exist inside us. The Buddha, Dhamma, and the Sangha exist within oneself. A good person is someone who respects him or herself. When one pays respects to a Buddha image, one doesn't bow to the cement, bricks, or stone. That is just convention. Know that to be externally reverential, one should have a noble one inside. That is to say, a moral mind, a supreme mind. There is an old saying, the malicious mind is a ghost, the righteous mind is a noble one. At one time, about 40 or 50 people came to practice with Luangpor Teean, lay people as well as monks. Some people had all sorts of reactions, some people cried. I've never had those kinds of problems. Even when some visions did arise, I'd see and understand it. It is like having eyes, one looks and one sees according to reality. For example, one sees mosquitoes swarming around, one sees a snake coming, one sees thorns, one sees an overgrown path in the forest, or one sees a cleared path. One sees similarly in the mind, one knows what to do, and so there is no more doubt anymore. No more doubt about the teaching of the Buddha and the Noble Ones, about what convention and ultimate reality is, about visions, about what tranquility meditation and insight meditation is. One has experienced it plainly and there is no wavering. One doesn't go and search anywhere else anymore, one has enough knowledge. Abandoning evil, and doing what is good, is really to be done right here. At our very body and mind. One sees the mind that stealthily thinks. It is full awareness that tells us so, it sums things up for us, that is sufficient knowledge and understanding. Once, I did some teaching together with somebody who taught a different style of meditation. That teacher taught to create an image in the mind. But the group of practitioners who had developed awareness, was aware and didn't think up a mental image, they didn't get attached to a sign. They weren't stuck on all kinds of ceremonies, such as the ceremony to cut off kama, by using cloth, incense, and other things. These types of rituals are finished with, they stopped doing them. They have stopped looking for teachers that teach one to know anything other than awareness, because the real thing is right here. One identifies with the qualities that one puts in one's mind. If you care for your children and love your husband or wife, then don't create suffering for yourself and don't be a bad person. If you are a bad person, you suffer. Your parents are worried, they have problems because of us. Loving one's children and wife is not just a matter of thought, rather, one should behave in a good way, don't be someone who makes trouble. All this depends on oneself, religion is within oneself. When we are good people, how could we do bad things and end up in prison? That there are such things as the law, prisons, police, the army, and weapons, is because there are bad people. If there were no bad people, why would we have to have those things? Why would there be soldiers and policemen? Why would there be prisons? If we behave well, we don't oppress ourselves, and how can we trouble others? May you really see and realize this. Some people with whom I used to practice together with, I don't know what they understood. They practiced as if they knew the Dhamma, but their actions, speech, and demeanor looked off. It compares to going to elementary school and not getting good marks, not being able to read. One is not allowed to go to the next class, one has to stay where one is, because one's actions indicate that there are still things that one doesn't know. This is called, not getting good marks, one doesn't find the way and so can't proceed. If one really finds the way, one doesn't back up. Just seeing the three characteristics, is enough to pass the grade. One doesn't get involved in conventional forms, one is able to liberate oneself in a good way. It makes one incline and flow in the direction of being without suffering. One practices continuously. It seemed as if practice was shortened, it was not as difficult as before. Before, it was as if the body moving was one thing, and the mind thinking, another thing. It seemed that the one who saw thought would pull things back and solve the problem. But now, I don't have to solve any problem, only just watching, and everything comes to an end. The state of watching means to watch whenever something arises, just watching and one passes onwards, continuously. So, I came to understand, I came to see that this is the path to overcome suffering, this is the living of the spiritual life. The state of watching is not stained by anything at all, because one doesn't get caught up, one just watches. And so, one is not involved, one is able to pass onwards all the time through seeing in a pure way. The state of neutrality means that one is not caught up in happiness or suffering. There is just watching, one sees happiness, one sees suffering, one sees knowing, one sees not knowing, one sees peacefulness, whatever happens, one sees all of it. One sees inside and outside oneself, not getting caught up. Even when people abuse, blame, or praise us, we just watch what happens. Whether it's cold, hot, or one is hungry, there is only just watching. This state of watching makes one extremely nimble, it makes one pass onwards. Having reached this point, one has a very high degree of agility. Like a car driving on a deserted road, there is no need to be careful. But when one gets to a road that is not deserted, a road where there are people, one is able to immediately use awareness and wisdom, one doesn't run away from society. Compare it to driving your car in the city, one knows which one the highway is, and which are the minor roads, one knows the red lights and the green lights, one knows the crossroads and one knows what's happening on the right and on the left. This makes for safety, this state of watching doesn't get stuck and no accidents occur. There is such a thing as mental traffic, for example, having thought something, there is concoction until a mood arises. But when awareness and wisdom are there, one passes it conveniently. Similar to a car passing, it's easy. There is no traffic to get stuck in, it's like a highway, freeway, or expressway. It's the same thing with training cows or buffaloes to pull a cart. Some cows that have been well trained, come walking over as soon as one raises the cart up, no need to force them, no need to tie them with ropes, no need to beat or whip them, they are ready to pull the cart home or to the barn. They are able to avoid stumps all by themselves and they know where to turn right or left. The state of watching sees. When one sees often, one becomes more and more experienced until one is a champion. Compare it to a sportsman or woman, who has played until he or she is skilled at what they do. Or an artist who has performed many times. A professional worker has to be skilled likewise, they must be able to use their tools to create a beautiful and artistic house. Developing awareness is the same, if one trains and practices a lot, one becomes so skilled that awareness turns into Mahasati, full and automatic awareness. Talking in terms of power, Sati has lots of power. It is similar to flooding water, that is able to sweep along the rubbish from the banks of a river or stream. The power of wisdom knowledge is the same, when there is lots of power, one doesn't have to make effort. It's comparable to a tractor, it clears the land completely. Wisdom knowledge is like that. For this reason, the things that are dirty, the things that are corruptions of the mind, that are stuck in one's character, until the attachment to them as being me, is as hard as a diamond, become as soft and gentle as silk, because purity of mind has arisen. The three fetters of 1. Self-view, 2. Doubt, and 3. Attachment to precepts and practices, are not just things in the scriptures, they exist in all of us. The 84,000 teachings in the Tripitaka, ancient Buddhist scriptures, exist in us, here. They are to be found in this fathom-long living body. The nature of our actions depends on our minds. One may be a spook, a giant, a devil, a hungry ghost, a human being, a person, an angel, or whatever, it all depends on our very minds. The state of watching and seeing doesn't get caught up, there is just watching and seeing continuously. In the end, self-view diminishes, that is to say, the ego diminishes. The state of watching continuously is the state of normality, therefore, virtue arises within one. It helps to destroy anger, desire, and delusion, which presently exist in us. Actually, those are the gross defilements, they are still there, but not fully, not 100%. A worldly person has 100% anger and gladness, When awareness has been developed, gladness and sadness gradually diminish. This indicates the quality of awareness. We both have moods of liking and disliking, wanting and not wanting. The state that clearly sees those moods indicates whether one is a noble one of low or high caliber. One can measure it with this. One shouldn't measure it by external forms or characteristics, such as whether one is ordained, how long one has been ordained, whether one is famous and has a title, which means in the world being this or that. That's not it. Rather, it's a matter of how level the mind is, how much does it go up and down. Is there much variation? If one still goes overboard with laughter when one is glad, it means that one has 100% gladness. This is called still being a worldly person. The state of seeing is like this. It doesn't get caught up in anything, but it is neutral, it is normal, and therefore, it is real virtue. To determine to observe precepts is external virtue, one looks after it, in order to live together in society, which is a good thing. As for the real training in virtue, it is the kind of virtue that melts and digests the defilements, so that the mind doesn't go up and down, because one sees them and so they can't remain. Doubt and attachment to rituals are abandoned, because one understands that everything is dependent on our actions, it is not an external matter. This state of watching, seeing, and not being caught up, is a formula, it is a guide in living one's life. It gives us this guidance, one doesn't have to recite or remember anything. The quality of buddho doesn't arise from reciting the word. Buddho means to know, to be awake and to have a joyful mind. In whoever the state of knowing, being awake and joy arises, that person has buddho in his or her mind. And it will protect and look after us, so that we don't fall into harmful states of mind. Just as the saying goes, the Dhamma will inevitably take care that a practitioner does not to fall into bad states. The Dhamma yields results, if one really knows and sees the way that should be known and seen. The more one studies, the more one sees clearly. Confidence will arise as well as deep devotion to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Noble Sangha. The state of realization and clear knowing is Vipassana, insight. So, insight is not about seeing colors and lights, heaven and hell, externally. Heaven and hell exist in our very minds. One shouldn't pray to angels, to come and help one in this and that way, that is appropriate for someone without a refuge, who hopes to find an external refuge in an illusory way. Being an angel means that one's mind has a sense of shame of wrongdoing. If everybody were to have this quality, there would be no need for prisons in our country, because everyone would protect themselves and no one would create suffering for others. So, seeing clearly in this way makes one abandon self-view, doubt and attachment to rites and rituals. It means that one turns around and solves problems within oneself. This state of watching makes one pay respects to the qualities of the Buddha, rather than to a golden image. It makes one pay respects to the characteristics of the Dhamma, rather than to books, and it makes one pay respects to the virtuous qualities of the Noble Sangha, rather than to robes and a shaven head. The meaning of the word monk, is an excellent person, someone with a good heart, that is to say he or she doesn't get angry, doesn't desire and doesn't get deluded. The kind of thoughts that say, he insulted me, I won't give in, don't exist in someone like that. There is just letting go, and understanding arises, clear seeing, until there is no anger. Getting and losing, happiness and suffering, praise and blame, are ordinary things in the world. Nobody can be their owner. And it is the same with sights, sound, smell, taste, bodily sensations and mental phenomena. They are things of the world, they belong to the world, they are not ours. Even sight, sound, smell, and taste have a worldly flavor to them. People don't know or understand it like this, and so they always have a sense of lacking something. For example, one is a slave of desire. The state of watching and seeing makes one feel satisfied, there is a sense of enough, there is no lack of anything, no shortage, and how are we going to suffer? Therefore, when there are virtuous qualities in all of us, we don't get deluded, we abandon evil, do what is right, and our minds are pure. The state of watching helps to cut down on things, and it makes us understand. It makes us able to overcome suffering. What it comes down to is a handful of Dhamma. The Buddha once compared his teachings to a handful of leaves. So, understanding the Dhamma is not something difficult for someone who has reached the state of watching. This is true regardless of whether one has studied or not, because attaining the Dhamma is not connected at all with studying. Rather, it is a matter of training oneself to let go of what is bad, to do what is good, and to purify the mind. That is what Dhamma is. Awareness, or the perfection of awareness, is not to be found in books or scriptures, it exists inside us. Don't be afraid of the ghosts outside, the ghosts are in your mind. In the Sutta, Discourse on Auspiciousness, the Buddha said, not to associate with fools, to associate with the wise, and to revere those that should be revered. These three things are the highest blessing. A fool here doesn't refer to Mr. A or Miss B. Gamblers, flirters, people who go to bars and nightclubs, people who drink, etc., are called external fools. But the real fools are inside of us, they are our thoughts. If we think harmful thoughts, our harmful thoughts may lead us to anger, desire, or delusion, they may lead one to defilement and craving. What does it mean to associate with the wise? It means to have good thoughts in our minds. For example, when some problem arises, we let go and don't dwell on it. Never mind, it is just the way it is. This is a wise person. Trying to not have anybody tell us off, or blame us, is impossible. But if we have good thoughts and think in the right way, and we know how to let go, we associate with the wise. It doesn't mean to get attached to this teacher or that monk, or getting deluded to the physical form of the Buddha, as was the case with the monk Vakali, who kept following and staring at the Buddha. The Buddha saw that this monk was getting lost, and so he taught him that, whoever sees the Dhamma, sees me. The monk Vakali then determined to practice the Dhamma, and finally, he realized the Dhamma. This is the way that I see and understand this matter of not associating with fools and associating with the wise. One should see it broadly, in all its aspects. It is comparable to light that radiates outwards, that way one knows completely and all around. It is not a matter of sitting with eyes closed and knowing, but one knows at the time one's eyes are open. Wherever one goes, one knows as one is living one's life as usual, being aware at the same time. The Buddha said that, whoever is aware continuously is like someone who lives in comfort at home with one's parents. There is warmth, kindness, and one is safe. What I'm saying comes from my own experience in training myself. It may not be elaborated in detail, but when you really determine to practice, you will have your own experience. You will know the taste of it yourself, and learn plenty of lessons. We must experience and see things for ourselves, we must let go ourselves, we must be liberated ourselves. Once we have a foundation, we will find the path. This is a law of nature. The state of watching, the state of knowing or awareness, compares to being at home with our father and mother. Of course, then we are safe, we're free from all possible dangers because our parents protect us. This befits the saying, Sati and Sampajanya are things that are of great assistance. Sati is recollection, or mindfulness, and Sampajanya is realization or full awareness. The state of watching is something superb, because there is emancipation, there is safety, there is cleanliness, purity appears, it is lofty virtue, lofty firmness of mind, and lofty wisdom. The state of watching helps support us to understand the conditions of body and mind, to know convention as convention, to know the suffering of Rupanama, to know the disease of Rupanama. And so, a transformation takes place in the mind, one becomes a human being and one who is virtuous. Pudpagatha Punyatha means having done good things in the past. For example, yesterday or today we've done something good. The words in the past don't refer to before we were born, or a previous lifetime. In the past here means actions done earlier on, such as yesterday, last week, or last year. So if we have received good directions, the results will be good, and our minds will become more and more pure. The mind of a virtuous person goes back to nature. His or her body and mind are in a state of normality. The process of knowing more and more takes us to the stream of liberation. It doesn't flow backwards, it goes in the direction of the path and fruits of practice, it goes towards being a noble individual, namely a stream enterer, a once returner, a non-returner, and an arahant. The state of knowing is like a warrior who is backed up with support, and so keeps enlarging his territory until he is in charge and has power. Therefore, wild behavior can't remain, the army of the Dhamma is there. It is like a warrior who is victorious, there is awareness. The state of watching and seeing is the victory of the warrior. One practices right at this point. Nothing can obstruct, there are no enemies that can resist, and so one is fluent. The state of watching makes the cankers of sensuality, being and not knowing, unable to remain. These cankers are refined defilements that ferment in the subconscious, until they become habitual. The state of watching stops the enemies, or if they don't stop, they'll dry up. It is like custard apples, some stay on the tree, all shriveled up. The enemies, defilements, surrender and don't fight anymore. The quality of knowing makes us watch concoctions in a dignified way, one is not a servant of thoughts anymore, as one was before. When proliferation starts to come up, begins to stir, the thoughts will stop when the quality of knowing sees it. It will just give up completely. When there is realization, there is nothing that can deceive. Wherever there is suffering, one is able to dig it all up. It's similar to water and oil, even a little bit of oil will always float on top of water. The Dhamma is the same, it is always on top of what is not Dhamma. This is a law of nature. Suffering, again, is the same, it cannot be on top of non-suffering. One could compare suffering with water and non-suffering with oil. I'm just comparing all the time, but when you really practice you will see clearly and have realization for yourself. There won't be any suffering and you won't think about suffering, because you regard it as unclean. Just like someone who has clean clothes on, how can they let dirty things soil it? In case something soiled it, they would brush it off immediately. It is as if in the past we were dirty. That's why we let anger and suffering stay with us for days on end, we had never met the intrinsic purity and cleanness of the mind. But when we discover the cleanness and purity of the mind, we no longer allow dirty things to be there. The suffering of clinging to the ego is a refined kind of dirtiness. Originally we didn't know that, but as soon as we really know that this is dirty, we pass through and overcome it. In this way, we're able to erase the ego and make it fade out. This state of watching leads to justness, and when justness arises, one has a proper standard, one takes it as a principle and a guideline or compass for living one's life. The state of watching and seeing makes us cross over the cankers of sensuality, being and ignorance, or whatever states are the cause for wanting to be and have, the mind is liberated continuously. In the scriptures it is mentioned that, a stream enterer and once returner, first and second stages of enlightenment, are people who still get reborn, that is to say, after death they are reborn in order to strive to be an arahant, fully enlightened one, in the future. But I understand the word rebirth to mean thought, interest, or whatever causes interest. When one has overcome that, one doesn't go back and think about things many times. For example, the eye sees a form or the ear hears a sound, as soon as one perceives it in one way or another, one reaffirms it, and thinks about it again and again until, for example, craving and lust arise. For a non-returner there is only one life, this one, which refers to thoughts that sneak in just once, and they won't go back to think about old stuff. They have realization and power, having thought once, it fades, they don't return to it, and so there is no rebirth. The word birth doesn't mean being born from mother's womb, that kind of birth happens only once, everybody knows that. But being born here, is the birth and death of Namarupa, in other words, the endless arising and passing away of the feeling of self. The Buddha said, "Before I attained insight knowledge, I wandered around through samsara, the round of transmigration, for countless lifetimes. I searched for the house builder, that is to say, craving, the thing that creates being. Being born is suffering each time." The words countless lifetimes stand for the arising and passing away of Namarupa. The collected birth stories of the Bodhisattva, a being striving for Buddhahood, refer to this. It doesn't mean that the Buddha was born as a rabbit or whatever in previous lifetimes, but there is nothing wrong with that explanation. The birth of a non-returner is a thought arising, which they immediately leave behind and annuls, so that nothing remains. It doesn't have value for him or her, and no karma is created. Such a one is not a servant of thought, they are free. They relate to things as being me or mine, only very little. Those things drop off. We discover and see these things without anybody telling us. It is the quality of knowing that tells us. It informs us of what is right and what is wrong, all by itself. One really sees clearly. The four jhana, meditative absorptions, have various factors. The first jhana, for example, has 5 factors. Jhana are hard to understand, one has to see them for oneself. One is capable of generating them, they make one get stuck because of their attraction, they give one a sense of happiness which is called worldly happiness. But the happiness that is beyond the world is without allurement. When the state of seeing arises, the mind becomes more and more liberated, and it leads to ultimate purity. A change takes place, namely, one is released from all kama. The words me, and to see, are separated from each other. There used to be always me, deep down there was still a self in the mind, but after practicing fully they become separated, and can't be connected again. It is as if form, feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness drop off and shatter like a bottle or a glass, they become unusable. At this stage of practice it is necessary to have a teacher. Let me tell you some of my experiences about this level of practice. That day after the midday meal, I didn't get up from my seat. I kept sitting until all the other practitioners had got up. Luangpor Teean saw me sitting and asked me, "What's up?" I told him what results had come in my practice. He said, "You're a fool. When those things drop off and are separated, why don't you come back to awareness?" Then I understood what Luangpor Teean meant, when he would teach that there is inevitably knowledge, meaning final knowledge, when the mind is liberated. When I got back to my hut, I put the kettle and my cup down, feeling proud of myself. After a little while, it happened again. When I looked right at the spot, I understood that when the mind is liberated, there must be knowledge of that fact. These things depend on each other. It really is the state that is beyond birth, aging, sickness, and death. It is like the 5 khandha, form, feeling, perception, volition, and consciousness, fail to work. In the past these 5 things diligently performed their duties, but now, they dropped off, shrunk up and stopped altogether. They were ready to return to nature. But one's life must go on, and so one must keep being aware continuously. Whenever one forgets or gets lost, one should come back to awareness. When one practices in the right way it cannot be otherwise. Having come to this point, it made me think back to my parents. It was worthwhile that they raised me. Their son was born in order to reach this final goal. This point really is 100% nature, one really is beyond birth and death. It is like Ajahn Buddhadasa, a very wise and famous teacher from the south, says, dying before death. The ego or sense of self dies before physical death occurs. If we regard practicing Dhamma as a sport, it is a sport that doesn't die because there is nothing that is born, ages, gets sick and dies. This is how I understand and know it. Anybody can find and see it in the same way. It is not limited by one's nationality or language, and it has nothing to do with having studied or not. Determined to practice. If you are aware of raising your arm, that's good enough. This is the excellent path, It really is the number one path, it is the way to understand one's life. I have trained myself like this, trained until the final goal. What I'm saying is not based on just thought, but I've seen that this is a law of nature. My words may not be exactly in accordance with academic learning, don't make anything out of it, that it is right or wrong in this and that way. Don't use reason to contradict things, even though that may be right, rather, take these words as advice to study, to know, and see. May whoever has knowledge and vision about this, help to spread it out, not in order to oppress anyone, but to help bring about confidence in the teachings of the Buddha, so there may be firm conviction that, the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha really exist. A sincere practitioner will get results, he or she will really know and see, and will really get rid of suffering in this lifetime. It is the genuine norm of life, it is the essence of friendship. Nothing changes, there is just straightness. May your life culminate in this point, and see that your life is just processes and conditions. Processes means, the body has to eat and go to the toilet, it has to lie down and sleep, it has to talk, these things have to be performed according to worldly conventions. Use your life in the ordinary way, like this, don't be angry or suffer until you die. Teachers in the past used to say, don't think that it is this or that person, who is talking about the Dhamma, don't have faith in the person who talks, and don't write them off either. These days, the faith of Buddhists is rather poor. People tend to have faith in this teacher or that Luangpor, and go to an extreme. But as soon as something happens to shake their confidence, they are heartbroken. Confidence in the Dhamma, we should use the Dhamma to develop the quality of our lives. Don't be attached to my teacher and my Luangpor, because that kind of faith doesn't lead to progress, rather, it is faith that makes one shrink back. When you understand like this, experiment with practice and take your actions as the criterion. When you do that and you see results, there will be confidence. It is not that one has faith because someone says the right things, faith because of someone's character, disposition, and demeanor. This kind of faith is dangerous, because it is not the confidence as was taught by the Buddha. At one time, after the Buddha had expounded the Dhamma, he asked Sariputta, the monk who was his chief disciple, do you believe what I'm saying? Venerable Sariputta replied, no, I don't. The monks who were sitting there all criticized Venerable Sariputta, saying, he doesn't even believe the Buddha, and they protested in the midst of the meeting. Next, the Buddha asked Venerable Sariputta, how do you see things? Venerable Sariputta respectfully addressed the Buddha, saying, I do not believe the Master, because what you have elucidated I know, see, and have realized already. Therefore I do not have any doubt on this matter, and there is no need to believe anybody anymore. Then, the Buddha spoke to the monks. Take Venerable Sariputta as your example. And so, one should experiment and practice with teachings, until one is Dhamma. If one still has anger and suffering, it means one is unable to solve the problem. Anger and suffering are not selves, but it is us who get lost. If we didn't get deluded, there would be no anger and no suffering. Only two things exist in our lives, namely, knowing and delusion. Do we spend more time with knowing or with delusion? We have to reflect on this for ourselves. If we still stay with delusion, we'll have to experience suffering and anger, for example, that's only natural. If we stay with the quality of knowing, we won't have anger or suffering. How can we stay with knowing? I have a method for all of you to try out, study and practice with. I'm not just telling you stories. I'm able to arrange a place and food for you, you don't have to pay for anything. This is because there are people with faith, who have offered money for food, for people who are interested to come and practice. In 1 year, as much as $1, in 1 month about $100. To lead retreats is my job, which I do fully, as skillfully as I can. I will be there as your friend. This age is the golden age. The Buddha, the Dhamma, the noble Sangha, the paths, the fruits of practice, and Nibbana, really exist. You can experience them in your life. If you are aware, it means that you have the sprout of enlightenment. The Buddha is not separate from awareness, this is the sprout of enlightenment, that will grow up later on. May all of you be assured that you really are able to discover the truth in your life. To sum up, training oneself means to train in developing awareness. Awareness is the standard. It has the highest effectiveness, up to the point that one is able to reach the state of being the watcher. Awareness makes the mind pure, it is the path, it is the whole of the practice. Someone who is aware has achieved being the watcher in the right way. As it says in the scriptures, the final instructions of the Buddha. As long as bhikkhus live in the right way, the world will not be void of arahants. Don't think of this matter as being very difficult for you, because you're able to do it. You're able to be it. When one lives in the right way, one doesn't get caught up following one's proliferating thoughts. Instead there is neutrality, no gladness and no sadness. The state of watching takes one to this point, the point where there is no happiness and no suffering, no love and no hate, no like and no dislike. On reaching this state, one is beyond the world, it is called Lokuttara. As for the word Lokiya, in or of the world, it means that one has a sense of self because of one's concoction, there is like and dislike, one goes for happiness and suffering, and one takes on gladness and sadness. If one practices in the right way, the mind will settle by itself. Living in the right way doesn't mean that one has to stay in a forest, but if one has continuous awareness, it is called living in the right way. It is not necessary to go off to the forest, to sit with eyes closed and walk in a very concentrated way, that's not it.
May all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born. May all beings be at ease.